and myself.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, let's begin. Borodar Croeso Pawb. Good morning. Welcome everyone to the open board meeting of the Welsh Ambulance Services Trust. Many of you will know me if you're watching, but my name's Martin Woodford. I'm the Trust Chair. Numerous colleagues here today, so could I ask, simply for those who don't know, you just introduce yourself when you first speak, if you could. A reminder that this is a meeting in public, not a public meeting in the sense that our audience can't contribute. It is a virtual meeting on this occasion. Recall last time in November that we met in Newport, physically face-to-face for the first time in a couple of years. Unfortunately, with the restrictions being reinstated, this meeting has had to be virtual. Obviously, with the easing ahead of us, we'd anticipate that our next meeting in March would be face-to-face again. As I said, it's not a public meeting, but we did invite, as is the custom, we have invited questions from the public in advance of the meeting with a kind of cut-off deadline, and we will endeavour to answer those part way through. If there are questions raised by members of the public watching now on Zoom, we will answer them subsequent to the meeting. A reminder also that we are recording the proceedings for the purposes of minute taking. And as you'll see from the screen, we're delighted that Sue has joined us at very short notice as our BSL interpreter. She is not our regular interpreter, but our two previously booked BSL experts, unfortunately both ill. So Sue is here for the first part of the meeting, and then we're without that service, but we're going to use the subtitles facility. So if you're watching the meeting, if you click on transcript at the foot of your screen, I'm told, and then you can then toggle subtitles on or off, and it will then enable you to see English subtitles. So we'll see how that goes and probably get some feedback afterwards. I can see on my menu at the bottom there, we've got live transcript, which I think is the button that you press. As far as panelists today, i.e. board attendees, just some reminders around the protocol. Could you please keep your microphone off unless you're speaking? That obviously minimises the risk of background noise. Because it's not so easy on Zoom to see hands being raised, could I suggest that you keep your camera off unless you want to speak? That will be a signal to me, or use the chat function and I'll pick it up from there. And just so the audience are aware, the chat function is simply an internal mechanism within the meeting to enable us to convey messages to smooth the order of business. So that's the kind of procedural run-up. A reminder, because it's quite a lengthy meeting today, that we will be taking a comfort break at 11:30 until 11:45, and we'll hold to that time. So that's a couple of hours ahead of us. So without further ado, and hoping that the background noise that I've got here stops very shortly, let's get into the meat of the meeting. So first of all, it's welcomes, and we do have a number of welcomes today. Firstly, I'd like to welcome back Damon Turner, our trade union representative, who's rejoined us. Very good to see you, Damon. I know we had a chat yesterday evening to warm you up for proceedings. So I hope that you ease back in successfully. It's good to see you. Which means Hugh Parry, who has attended hitherto, drops out for today. He's in reserve, if you like. And then we have attendees for two items on the agenda who aren't board members. For item 11, a bit further on, we have Beth Ann Williams, who is a 111 nurse, who will be sharing her experiences as a member of staff during the pandemic, and we're looking forward to meeting her. We had hoped to see her last time in November, but that didn't work out for technical reasons. And then also we'll be welcoming for item 10 our commissioners, which is a first for some time. Stephen Harry, Chris Turner, and also I think Richard Baxter, who is the project manager, who will be providing technical support. So we look forward to that discussion with them. Okay, in terms of apologies, the only apologies I've had are from Joga Singh, who unfortunately has an employment tribunal that he's involved with professionally today. No others. I'll just pause to check, Trish, whether you've had any additional apologies through your end.
I haven't, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And a note for people wondering what's happening. Jason Killin's our CEO. Jason, I think you've got to leave slightly before 1 o'clock because you've been invited to the Health and Social Care Committee of the Senate.
Yeah, that's correct, Martin. Probably about 12:45. Okay,
so feel free to depart when you feel you need to, but you'll be here for the main business of the meeting. That's great. I'll move on there, if I may, to it feels like the chair's show at the beginning, doesn't it, as we rattle through the procedural stuff. Declarations of interest, which we customarily invite. So we have 4 standing declarations from Emrys Davis, Kevin Davis, Kerry Jackson and Claire Vaughan. Are there any others that we need to record? Doesn't sound like it. Okay, so we'll record those as is usual in the minutes. That leads us on then neatly to the minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated quite lengthy. That's the meeting on the 25th of November in Newport. Are there any points of accuracy regarding those minutes? I won't go through page by page. Just pause there to check that you're comfortable with them. Okay. Are we happy to improve them? Be good to hear a couple of voices say yes.
Yes, happy to approve.
Okay.
Yes.
yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, colleagues. We then move on to the matters arising. We actually have the action log with 2 items on it. Firstly, a question from a member of the public received last time, where we undertook to respond subsequent to the meeting. And I think, Estelle, I can see you there. That's being dealt with through correspondence between myself and the person who raised the question, and there may be some further follow-up to that. So we're regarding that, as far as the board, as a closed item.
Yes, that's right, Martin. Yeah.
Okay. And then there was a second action point, which is one I think probably for you, Rachel, around the clarity of reporting around post-production lost hours. I think it was about the return to base figures within that, wasn't it? Which I think you've picked up in the IPR.
Yeah, that's right. So I think the narrative says it can be closed, but it's looking as if it's still open. But yeah.
So depending on how we feel when we get to that report, we can treat that as closed from here.
Yeah, lovely.
Okay. So far, so good. The Chair's Roadshow continues, although I think we might gain some time here, hopefully. We come on to my formal report. This has developed quite considerably of late, thanks to Trish, our board secretary, bringing some I think, structure to things, which I find very welcoming, because it enables us to conduct business more smoothly. So first of all, you're asked to ratify Chair's actions taken between the November board and today. Obviously, these are only used in extremis for short-term decisions, but you'll see there in the paper reference to 2 Chair's actions. Firstly, on the 3rd of December, Chair's action with regard to spending on 2 schemes to take up Welsh Government capital funding available short notice at the year end. And secondly, on the same date, the fixing of the trust seal to 3 documents. We're required to report those things to the board. So we're happy to approve the Chair's actions taken on the 3rd of December.
Yep, fine.
Yes. Thank you. And then secondly, on the 13th of January, Chair's action regarding settlement of a complex clinical negligence claim up to a value of 663k, as is set out in the papers. Are you happy to endorse that action?
Yes.
Yep, happy.
Okay. Thank you for staying with it. Okay. We'll then move on to the second part of the Chair's report, which are decisions taken in private session of the Trust Board. Trish, I think we've introduced I think, rigor of procedure here, in that what we're required to do is to report decisions taken in private, but the private board itself will ratify the minutes of those meetings.
That's correct, Chair, and we'll have a guidance note around that goes to the next audit committee as well, so that's clear.
Okay, so you'll see there in the paper reference to 2 private sessions on the 25th of November and 16th of December, and the 2 key decisions taken. I would hasten to add that private business is, we normally take business in public. It is only taken in private session where there are particular sensitivities, for example, around patient confidentiality, commercial sensitivity, and so on. But here are the decisions that we did take. Firstly, around the business justification case for the fleet replacement programme, and secondly, the approval of the outline business case for the Merthyr Fleet Workshop. So are you happy to note those 2 decisions, which of course you would have been party to as members of the board?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nearly there. Thirdly, as a one-off, what we brought to the board with Trish's help is an outline of the purposes of the Chair's working group, which is not formally a committee of the board. It's a mechanism that operates informally between myself, committee chairs, and lead executives, in effect to smooth and the conduct of the board business to improve governance. And what we have here is an outline of the purposes of that group, to be explicit about what's happening. And I think that's been captured very succinctly in the paper. So we're asking for you to approve that outline of the Chair's working group arrangements, noting that if necessary we'll report to the board on anything that we've of significance that we've covered. Are you happy with that?
Yes.
Yeah, fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. And finally, although it's not covered in the paper, I think it's probably worth me simply adding verbally the fact that we as a board have held a number of board development sessions in private since November. Firstly, on the 16th, as you'll recall, we had an extensive session where we looked at our long-term strategy. We looked at our plans around diversity and inclusion and the behavioural standards that we're seeking to set as an organisation. And then on the 25th of January, which earlier this week, in other words, we had a discussion about the development of our plans for next year, which will be coming to the board in February and March, and also a discussion about cybersecurity and the implications of that for the trust. So those were the 2 development sessions held. No decisions made, simply to note that that's the nature of the business that we've been conducting informally through our development meetings. So if you're happy just to note that in the minutes, there's very little more to add.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, folks. So that's the conclusion of my report, which is, as you see, much more procedural than previously, but I think it gives us a discipline in terms of the business, and also we gain a bit of time, which is good. So, Jason, I think that moves us on, unless I've missed anything, to your report, which is of far greater interest because it's about the real world.
Thank you, Martin. And as usual with the report, I'll just highlight a couple of areas from it and take any questions. Before I do that, there's just 2 items I just want to, I think, note today and reflect on for the board. Colleagues inside the organisation will be aware that earlier this week, I shared sad news about the loss of a colleague from the non-emergency patient transport service. So this is Deb Barry, who joined us in January last year, and after a short illness passed away in the early hours of Saturday morning. Even in the short time that Deb was with us, she established herself as a very strong and popular member of the team at our VPH Clinical Contact Centre, and of course our thoughts are with Deb's family, friends and colleagues after her passing. So I think it's just appropriate that we reflect and pause briefly to remember a lost colleague. In addition to that, if I can, Chair, before I turn to my report, of course, everyone will be aware that today, the 27th of January, is Holocaust Memorial Day. And here we remember those affected by Holocaust and genocide, not only, of course, from the Nazi persecution of various groups, but also genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. So our thoughts are with those who lost their lives, and we remember the impact of those terrible events. So turning to the board report today, Martin, if I can take colleagues first of all to page 5 and sections 16, 17 and 18. This is in the capital and estate section. I'm particularly pulling out here the work that's underway in the operational estate, both in a number of stations, also in terms of upgrades at point 17 with the new Cardiff ambulance station nearing completion of the works now, and also significant progress with the Southeast Fleet workshops, with a new site now being purchased, reported here. And of course, the board will be aware of that from our previous discussions, but good progress here with a number of estate schemes, and it's pleasing to see further improvement work on our operational estate, given the needs that do exist there. If I can just go down the page to point 23, and again, this is pleasing to see support from government here, with approval of a fleet replacement programme totalling just over £15 million for the next financial year. Of course, this replaces vehicles in the existing fleet, doesn't necessarily grow the fleet, but what we will be doing here is introducing further plug-in hybrid vehicles, moving us further towards or closer towards our decarbonisation targets over the next couple of years. So good to see not only the fleet replacement programme being approved with considerable further inward investment being made towards us, but also through that programme being able to support the decarbonisation agenda that we have as well. If I can then go forward to the bottom of page 6, and this is points 26 and 27. I just want to pause here on an innovative programme with specialist paramedics now working in partnership with Swansea Bay and the palliative care team in the community. The board will see, and those that have access to the papers will see a couple of paragraphs there mentioning this new scheme, which has been not only nationally but internationally recognised for the great work that it's doing, and colleagues may have seen some local press coverage recently from clinicians involved with the care of patients, recognising that this improvement or this partnership deploying specialist paramedics in the community with the palliative care team is having a real benefit, not only for those patients but of course for their relatives at an extremely difficult time. So I think that's very pleasing to see that develop, but also good results coming from it at such an early stage. And then if I can take us to point 41, I'm specifically calling this point out because there's been a number of queries from staff that are retained on bank contracts, particularly in EMS, about access to iPads. The board will be familiar with the fact that we issued personal issue iPads to all of our frontline staff probably about 2 years ago now, and we're now in a position where we've been able to roll out iPads to bank staff as well. So for those bank staff colleagues that may be tuning in or watching the board meeting later on, your iPads will be with you shortly. And then the final points I just want to draw out, Martin, if I can please, appear on page 11, and this is to do with the 111 service. It's pleasing to see here at point 61 of the report that our first consultant clinician in the 111 service took up post last month, and will be leading a new team of clinicians to improve the quality and clinical services that we provide through the 111 service. And you'll see in the point above at 60 work being reported there by the training team specifically, with a large program of recruitment both for call handlers and clinicians being supported in the coming months. So I'll stop there, Martin, and as usual, happy to take any questions on what I appreciate is a rather extensive paper.
Extensive, but very comprehensive and exciting, actually, with the range of things that are going on. So very useful. Now I can actually see your hand, Martin, so this is good.
Good.
I think
good.
next.
It's yeah, it's a great report. It covers a lot of things, so I find it extremely helpful. But I wanted to ask you about paragraph 33, which relates to the COVID vaccination program within the trust. It's two questions probably, and it might be one for our medical director. One is how many staff have we got who are refusing vaccines, and perhaps more importantly, what are we doing about it, or what's our stance, particularly on frontline staff who've decided they don't want to go forward for vaccinations?
Okay, thanks, Martin. I'll probably bring in Claire Vaughan if I can on that particular point. I mean, what I would say to start with is we've got very good uptake of both the initial double vaccines and then the booster program as well amongst our staff. And when we benchmark our position against other UK ambulance services, we do extremely well. But of course, there are some colleagues for health or personal reasons have chosen or elected not to have a vaccine, but they are in small numbers. And Claire, perhaps you might want to come in on that particular point in terms of numbers and also what we're doing about it.
So Martin, we don't record who refuses. That is not data that is recorded in Wales. What we record are the numbers of people who are taking those vaccinations up. And as Jason said, those numbers are very high. And when we compare them with others, it's actually at paragraph 33 in the report, tells us where we are in terms of our vaccination numbers. Clearly, the issue of mandating vaccines is a big and challenging issue in England. It is not the same position in Wales at the moment. That does not mean that we do not do as much as we can possibly do to encourage people to help by creating access for them. So where people have concerns or have issues in accessing a vaccination, the team are on hand to help enable that to happen. And we have had some problems with that before. We have very clear guidance out there about release to go and get your vaccinations and boosters. And we have regular messaging that goes out to encourage people to have their vaccinations and to do the right thing. But at this point in time, across Wales, we do not record refusals.
So can I just come back on that? I won't prolong this. It's just an issue maybe that in England they've gone, gone to the extreme, I guess, where they're saying staff who don't get vaccinated will lose their jobs effectively. And I know it's a big issue and it's going to have repercussions, I'm sure. And I hear what you say about Wales, but I just worry that because I noticed we've put something in our risk register now about COVID cases. It's just, what position are we in if we allow unvaccinated staff to pick up very vulnerable people? I'm just concerned that, we rather than wait for Welsh guidance or advice, which as far as I'm aware, they haven't given us any, other than they're not going to make it mandatory. I'm not sure they've given us any other advice on what we should do with unvaccinated staff looking after vulnerable patients. It's whether or not we should develop an internal policy which either allows our staff to carry on as they did before, or that we restrict their contact with vulnerable patients. I don't know, Claire. I'm just looking at it and thinking, well, why is England so, they go in that way, we're probably not doing enough, maybe. I don't know.
So can I come back if that's okay? And Jason, maybe I'll ask Andy or Claire to comment on this. There is guidance obviously out there has been issued to staff around vaccination and shielding and the picking up, the getting out there and returning to work after COVID and self-isolation, which gives us some guidance and some reassurance that as we're looking at how we apply that guidance, you know, the risks associated with our people going out. And you have to remember that our people also wear PPE, and, you know, we have good training in place for them. And maybe that's a good point for Claire or Andy to respond on it. But as it stands, we are moving forward very much as a whole in NHS Wales in terms of the guidance that we apply and where we do it. And so, you know, this is not something that we would be looking to do locally in terms of applying or developing guidance over and above what is already in place across the whole of Wales, not without some considerable discussion and consultation with sort of colleagues across the whole system, I think.
So we, Andy or Claire, perhaps to come in, and Paul, I think you wanted to come in on this point as well, didn't you?
I'm happy to come in, Chair. Yeah, so thank you, Martin. Thank you, Claire. As you said, Claire, we do have guidance around how to risk assess in terms of where staff are working and indeed the setting in which they work. And we would expect you know, local risk assessments in terms of individual staff members to take place with their managers, because the setting in which they work in will be unique to each of them. And of course, the other, you know, mitigating thing that we have here is the use of PPE, and the fact that within the service we have always taken a line around individual risk assessments with PPE, and indeed we have, you know, gone further than the national guidance around PPE, and all of those things are part of the package of, you know, protecting the public and indeed protecting our staff.
Paul, do you want to come in at that point? I can see Andy's there as well, and we probably need to move on.
Yes, please, Chair. Just to give some assurance to the board that the People and Culture Committee looks at this data, and we have quite in detail discussions around it. I think it's also important that we recognise that whilst we are seeing people who are not taking up the vaccine, it's not necessarily a refusal. There may be other medical reasons why they're not undertaking the vaccine, and we don't distinguish that. So I think we need to be careful that we are not assuming that the number who are not taking up the vaccine are actually refusing on other than medical grounds. So I think that's an important issue for us, because we don't distinguish between those people who are unable for whatever reason to take up the vaccine. I just wanted to ask a question on mental health, if I could, Chair, or shall I wait till later?
Could you just pause, because I think there are others who are slightly ahead. We'll come back to that, Paul, so stay visible.
Thank you.
I don't know whether Andy Swinburne's now switched his camera off, so I assume he's not wanting to comment.
No,
my suggestion is
Claire picked up my point.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you raising the issue, Martin. It's a genuine and I think public issue, so it's useful to air it. We're obviously not going to solve this today, and there's probably more discussion needed offline to work through what our position is. Unless, Jason, you want to say anything by way of conclusion on it. I think it's the right thing to have aired, given all that we've been through, and the public will be interested. But I think we had a very clear exposition of the difference between Wales's position and England.
Yeah, I think that's right, Martin. I mean, yeah, Welsh Government's position is that we will not be mandating COVID vaccines for NHS and social care staff, and of course, as an NHS body within Wales, that is the position we adopt too. I think what I would say is, as I touched on earlier, you know, our uptake of COVID vaccination amongst our frontline patient-facing staff is very high, and when you compare us to other ambulance services across the UK, we are at the top end in terms of uptake. So I would offer that we don't actually need a position that requires it to be mandatory, because we've got, you know, 94% of our frontline staff of having had 2 jabs, and 82% have had a booster, which of course is much higher than the rates in other UK ambulance services, and higher than the community rate. So I think we start from a good position. Yeah,
I think that's a good point to leave the issue, but well worth raising, I think, because it's in the minds of the public. We'll move on. Kevin, I think you were first up amongst an array of non-executive directors very keen to contribute. So over to you.
Yeah, and I think just very quickly, the issue for me is less about COVID vaccine and more about flu vaccine. Particularly, the evidence looks like it's going to be a late wave of influenza this year,
based on other data. Jason, a great report as always. And those of us that have been around for a while have followed the palliative care rollout journey with real interest and I would say a sense of pride, because it's a really remarkable story that evidences ambulance out of hospital capability away from transport. And I think that's a really important message from our strategic discussions that we've been having over the last while. And I just think well, two things. Do you see, or how do you see this being generalised across Wales as an offer? And there are a number of other initiatives that are, avoiding transport and enabling care at home, which we know so many patients value. Is it time to? Are all of those initiatives collated in one place now? And is it time perhaps to collate them so that we can have a broader view of the out-of-hospital offer that is about avoiding transport? Because a number of us are in different sorts of arenas where these discussions could be played into enabling wider understanding of what a 21st century ambulance service actually can offer.
Good point. Really good
Sorry,
point.
over and above the medical model that has been, traditionally the thing that people will have have in their minds about an ambulance service, which is not the case now, obviously.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I'll bring in Rachel and Andy Swinburne on this point in a second. I mean, just to start the conversation off, I mean, the board will be familiar with the fact that our future direction is very much one which conveys fewer patients to emergency departments, treating and closing episodes of care either upstream through our clinical contact centres with greater clinical impact, or with specialist clinicians on the ground seeing patients, where they present in their homes, in their workplace, and so on. So there are roles we see for other specialist types of specialist clinicians, specialist paramedics, in addition to the advanced paramedic practitioner role. So we are very much on a hopefully accelerated journey starting in the new financial year, which will see us reduce the number of patients we convey to an emergency department where it's safe and appropriate for us to do that, because we know it's better for the patient, we know it's offers greater value for money for the entire system, and we know that it can be done safely with appropriate clinicians that are trained and supported in the right way. So perhaps if I just bring Andy in first on, what the scope of other specialist paramedics might be in a context where we generally don't have a problem recruiting, where of course there are challenges in recruiting across the rest of the NHS, particularly in nursing roles. And then Rachel, perhaps just for a few words on the strategy and where we're trying to take things. So Andy first.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So, I mean, it's a great question, Kevin. And, I've been, whilst a big endorser of the palliative care paramedic scheme that we've set up, I've been amazed at the traction that this has got and the effectiveness it's already proven. And, testament to Ed O'Brien and Andy Chohan, who's been kind of leading this project with the health board, because it really has moved things on quite considerably, and they have quite a robust data gathering process to get some of the both qualitative and quantitative information from the project to illustrate the impact it's had. But we've had a huge amount of anecdote from other community services to illustrate the impact it's had from the outset. So I think we are going to have a fairly robust picture as to where it could fit in. Now, in terms of other opportunities, we already have another health board that's expressing interest in seeing, whether they could do something similar in their patch as well. And I think workforce aside, I think of course we'd want to see what we can do. But I mean, the sky's the limit, I think, is in response to where are other opportunities, because as Jason touched upon there, we are in terms of paramedicine, we are fortunate that we can recruit really quite reasonably well, and as long as we put some planning into that and do that at the right time in that workforce cycle, I think we can look to support other parts of the health economy. I'll pass over to Rachel now in terms of that strategic bit where these things are picked up.
Apologies, apologies. Noted that. So a couple of things to comment on, Kevin. I think it's a really good question. The first one is that, in fact, in F&P last week, we so obviously this came from a performance angle, but we thought it would be really interesting to do a bit of a deep dive on our see and treat rates, our conveyance rates, our shift left activities at the next F&P. So that will bring some of this thinking together in that forum. So that's helpful. The other thing to note is that part of our commissioning intentions for next year is to develop a strategy around optimizing conveyance, which covers all of these things. So we will be bringing all of that together into one strategy. And obviously the place internally where we're picking that up is the work on the inverted triangles, as Jason has noted. We started that conversation at the first 2-day workshop. We've got another 2-day workshop now coming in a couple of weeks' time. And the workforce, the shape of the workforce, the type of workforce, we started that conversation at the last workshop, and that'll be a big part of the agenda this time. So I think there's a couple of pieces of work coming together where we will, exactly as you say, try to bring this together into one place so we can see what we're doing now and what that kind of plan is going forward and the opportunities. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm just reflecting. I was at a seminar where Nigel Crisp presented just before Christmas, and he was talking about conceptually, home is where health happens, regardless of what your health challenge is. Even on an end-of-life pathway, home is where health happens, hospitals are for repairs, and home is where all health should be delivered. Conceptually, quite an interesting way of looking at things. But anyway, listen, thank you very much.
Really good discussion. I'm conscious that we've got non-executives offering not to make comments because of time, but I'm going to go to Kerry next, and if time permits, I'll go to Beth Ann, who I think wanted to make a comment as well.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jason. A great report. So this question builds on the discussion already around the strategy. So I really welcome our strategic ambition. I recognise that it's evolving, but I wonder if you could just share with us your ambitions around the timeline of those strategic ambitions. And obviously I appreciate there's different elements, but if you have an overview you could share with us, that'd be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. And again, I'll bring Rachel in a second. I mean, I'll start from a position that says, clearly our ambition would be to go as fast and as hard as we can, but of course that needs to be done in a safe way, at a pace which is supported by the rest of the health system, because we can't do this unilaterally. What we're seeking to do, essentially convey less patients to emergency departments, close more episodes of care safely in the community, refer patients where it's appropriate to other bits of the system, avoiding the bottleneck in the emergency department, give patients as a result of that a better experience and more timely service, care closer to home, so on and so forth. So all of that needs to be done at a pace which can be supported by the rest of the health economy. Now, I think we're talking about a period of probably 2 to 3 years on an incremental build-up basis. So we wouldn't see a big bang change from the end of February into March, say. This will be an incremental shift, and that shift, I think, occurs variably across the geography, because health boards are in different places, and we've got in some health boards perhaps we're closer to realising the ambition. Swansea Bay would be a good example with the palliative care scheme we've just discussed. So I think it will vary by health board area, and it will incrementally build over a 2 to 3 year period, assuming the support that we've seen from commissioners and from government for the direction of travel that we've set out continues. I don't know, Rachel, if you want to perhaps add some detail to that, and any other reflections.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, my first comment was going to be exactly that, Jason, which is that this is an incremental programme. So if we think about the fact that we've had investment for 40 practitioners, clinicians into our clinical support desk this year, so they're all coming online, around now and up till the end of March. So that is, quite a big step forward in that element of our strategy, which will be in place, from now, and we'll be working on making sure that that's as an effective use of that resource as we can. We know we've been talking to commissioners about really starting to up the ante on training of more APPs. We can't get APPs in immediately because they take 12 months to train. So again, it's about developing that program over the next 2 to 3 years, as you say, Jason, gradually growing that workforce. And I suppose from a technical perspective, to kind of which might give you some assurance, Kerry, we this 2-day workshop that I was alluding to a minute ago, which is in a couple of weeks' time, it's the second of these workshops that we'll have held, and the aim of that workshop is almost to design that program plan. So at the end of the workshop, we want to have understood the key the key pieces of work we need to do to really make this a reality over the next 2 to 3 years, identify what the work streams are, who's going to lead those, some indicative timescales. So we've always got a project plan or a program plan coming at the end of that session. And then we can share that with board members, because that will give a sense of those steps and those timescales, for each of those steps. But I think it's, it's not something that we're going to have to wait a long time for, because as I say, we've got some things already in train that are really critical and key and exciting. But it won't all be done immediately. Yeah.
Thank you both. Really good point, Kerry. To me, it highlights the need for the board to continually bring forward this work as it progresses to this kind of meeting, so that we can keep pace with the planning that's being conducted. But I think the answer makes perfect sense. Jason, with your forbearance, can we just have one last comment from Beth Ann before we move on? I mean, your report is generating a lot of interest. That's good, isn't it?
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jason. As always, your report is very detailed, and I don't have a question. However, I wanted to make some comments. There are so many positive comments positive initiatives within your report. One of which you mentioned in your introduction, which is the palliative care initiative, which I was going to flag. But also for me, there are one or two other standouts that we've been talking about for a while. So paragraph 62 talks about the mental health practitioners, and I was delighted to see that we've recruited some new staff now, 6 new staff that will join us next month. And that is so important, as we've discussed repeatedly at board meetings and other committee meetings. The need for mental health support, and that support from WAST is very clear, and that has grown throughout the pandemic. So I really am delighted to see that we're bringing to life now some of those discussions that we've had. And secondly, paragraph 58 talks about the falls and the falls team. And again, this is an area where I know we often get called on for support, and hopefully by investing further into our falls team, we can support the wider system pressures really across the NHS. So I was pleased to see that. And my final point, which is a switch really, is to the partnerships and engagement angle. So paragraph 73. And I just wanted to thank you and your team really, because throughout this pandemic, which has been so very difficult, and those words just don't do it justice in terms of the challenges everybody has faced, but throughout that, you've made yourselves accessible. You've managed the communications both with direct interviews, but also using social media platforms so well. And I know that Estelle and her team are sitting in the background facilitating and enabling a lot of that. But I just wanted to, give kudos to you and your team really, to thank you for all of that. I know it's not always easy, but I think it's been really important and well received. Diolch yn fawr, thank you.
Thank you, Beth Ann. I think you should take the glory there, Jason, with your team for those comments. It's good news. We might come back to mental health. I know Paul had some thoughts which perhaps we can weave in a bit further on. But are we happy, after, I think, very good discussion, we're happy to receive Jason's report, unless there's anything else, Jason, you want to say by way of conclusion?
I think we've ventilated quite a lot of the detail in the report, so nothing else to say, Martin. Thank you.
A lot of enthusiasm. Sorry, Kevin, you've appeared. You're happy.
Sorry, I was agreeing. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so we will be more than note your report. I think it's generated a lot of useful comment. One or two things there to follow up. So without further ado, we'll move on to questions from the public. And I think I'll go over to you, Estelle, for this.
Yes, Martin, you do. Good morning, everybody. And for those
a very bright picture of Jason has appeared on my screen, but I'm glad you've now appeared. On Susan.
Am I here? Can you see me now?
Yeah, thank you.
So good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Estelle Hitchin. I'm Director of Partnerships and Engagement. We normally ask for questions from the public in advance of the meeting. And on this occasion, Martin, to the best of my knowledge, we've only had one question that has been sent to us in advance. And I'm just going to dig that out now. We have in the interim also had some positive comments from some of our colleagues who are watching us live, particularly from Nicole, who tells us that the ambulance service came out to her a couple of weeks ago. She didn't want to go to hospital, but she was immensely well cared for and very grateful for the care that she did receive from our teams. So very happy to hear that, and hope, Nicole, that you are on the mend. And we've also had some positive comments for Susan, our BSL interpreter, thanking us for doing the usual stint in the BSL translation, which I know is very, very well received by our members of the deaf community. So on to the question, Martin, and this relates to the use of army medics, which many of you who are watching will have seen publicised in the media, that we have the military in for their third stint with us during this pandemic. And the question is, I understand that army medics who were used recently to assist the Welsh Ambulance Service were not trained to drive on blue lights. And therefore, if an ambulance attended a high-level call, a second ambulance would then have to be sent to drive the original ambulance, while the paramedic from the first ambulance dealt with the patient. What benefit was this to the ambulance staff and the service? So I think the core of the question is, if military colleagues cannot drive on blue lights, what role are they playing, and what benefit is that to staff, to the service and to patients? And I'm going to hand over to Lee Brooks, our Director of Operations, to respond to that. So Lee, over to you, if I may.
Good morning. So let's start by saying that of course military do remain with us, adding capacity to our frontline production, which is very positive. They've been with us since October and are likely to be remaining with us through to and including March. The capacity that's created as a consequence of that is in the region of 10 to 15% to our frontline ambulance. So the contribution is sizable, and particularly at a time when we have faced the challenges that we have faced. The question, in fact, was given much consideration by us when we were deciding how best or how we felt that we could best utilise this military capacity. And that included both clinical consideration and modelling in terms of the impact. Blue light driving, of course, is a qualification, and some may not be aware that it takes quite a lot of training to attain that qualification. It's 4 weeks in training, and so being able to put through the number of military personnel that we have received, in the region of 250, through 4 weeks of training was simply impossible, and particularly as well given that we have not sought to slow our own recruitment, which means that all the training capacity that we have has to be prioritised towards our own recruitment and our own permanent staff. I absolutely recognise that for a crew consisting of a paramedic or an emergency medical technician with a member of the military may have an additional decision to make at a time that a patient needs to be transported, because of course the military driver cannot drive under emergency conditions or using the blue lights and sirens. And of course, there is a balance of risk in terms of that decision. And certainly the considerations were made by us when we made the decision in relation to military and how military were to be used. Now, we do know that from our modelling, and it's quite obvious that if an ambulance is making its way to the hospital under normal driving conditions as opposed to under emergency conditions, that is likely to add time that it takes for that patient to arrive at the hospital. And of course, that also depends on how far you are from the hospital. But our modelling suggested that it was minutes. And when you're balancing that risk against the potential for either not being able to send an ambulance to the patient in the first place, then for us it was quite clear that the balance was much more in favour of a patient to be able to send a response that can provide a level of care that could begin to move a patient towards the hospital, as opposed to either not being able to send an ambulance at all, or of course there being a very prolonged and extended wait for that help to arrive. So I hope that that offers the benefit that we've experienced as a consequence and some of the rationale behind the decisions that were made.
Thank you, Lee.
Thanks, Lee.
I'll pause there because of background noise, but I take it that's our only question, Estelle?
It is, Martin, and just two things there that we've had in from our viewers. One is Nicole, who I mentioned very early on, who'd given praise for staff in her recent episode of care, noted that one of the colleagues who attended her was from the military, and she was very pleased with the support that he offered her. And also just to note that clearly our military colleagues are not necessarily medics in themselves, so just clarifying that, as Lee has explained. And I think that's it. That's all we've had in for questions this time, Martin.
But a very good question, you know, a topical issue of the moment, and a good explanation from Lee. So helpful. I think then in that case we can move on to the next item, if we're happy. Change of subject to charitable funds. A reminder that as a board we are trustees of the corporate trustee for the charitable funds that we hold, donations and so on from the public, and we are required to account for those funds, which is why we have the charitable funds annual report and accounts on the agenda. And Chris, I know you've been busy. A lot of work brought to fruition here, so I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Turley. I'm the Trust's Director of Finance, and in the context of this, the trustee of the charitable funds. And it does give me pleasure today to present probably the final part of business for the 2021-22 financial year that I'll be bringing through to board as we rapidly get towards the end of the 21-22 financial year. So for the 2020-21 year, I'm bringing today for board's approval, hopefully the charitable funds accounts. Just to note that in doing so, these have been through the Charitable Funds Committee twice, actually. A draft set of the accounts was presented to the committee on the 4th of November 2021, and this final draft that you're seeing today, following a review by Audit Wales, was considered by the committee a week or so ago on the 17th of January. As with everything, it's been a very different year, isn't it, in terms of the last 2 years, in fact, but certainly the financial year 2021. And you see that in the way in which we've seen some of our charitable funds balances impacted in a positive way in terms of the year in question. We've seen increasing balances as a result. We had, for the context of our charitable funds, we've had some significant levels of income in the, as I say, the context and the proportion of our fund balances historically. And as Charitable Fund Committee members in particular, but other members of the board will know, we have now some detailed spend plans coming through, some of which have been enacted already in the 2021-22 financial year since the closure of this set of accounts as at the end of March 2021. And more plans to bring through from a committee perspective in terms of the future of the charitable funds, the focus, the vision that we want to take forward in terms of building on some of the positivity that we've had in terms of the focus on NHS charities over the last couple of years. In terms of the accounts themselves, it's probably a fairly straightforward set of accounts. It's predominantly cash based. It's an income and expenditure set of accounts, resulting in a fund balance at the end of the year. As such, we've had a couple of conversations, haven't we, both at committee and briefly at board previously, around the level of scrutiny that these accounts need to go under, and agreed again through the Charitable Funds Committee that for this financial year of 2021, they would be undertaken by Audit Wales in terms of what's described as an independent evaluation of those set of accounts, as opposed to a full audit. We have agreed that we will, for good practice purposes, undertake a full audit of the financial year 2021-22's accounts through the end of this calendar year. But for the purposes of this set of accounts, they again went through a detailed but a slightly lighter touch independent examination, which is well within the requirements of the Charities Commission in terms of the level of funds that we hold and the number of transactions and the income and expenditure in a particular year within our accounts. And at the Charitable Funds Committee on the 17th of January, the Audit Wales representative was again more than pleased to provide a clean bill of health on those accounts in that context, with one slight amendment to the draft accounts that the committee had seen previously, having been made since that version that went to the committee, and that was in fact only related to the audit fee, which was based on the level of audit that we were going to have on this set of accounts in this particular year. One final thing that as trustees we do also need to make sure we take a view on in hopefully approving this set of accounts now is it's a slight technical one, but it's an assessment of the going concern nature of the charity as well, and as the Treasurer, I'm more than pleased to sort of offer that going concern view, in terms of the level and healthy fund balances we have coming into the current financial year. So in hopefully approving these set of accounts, I'm more than happy to confirm that assessment, that as a charity we have a financial situation that allows us to consider ourselves as a going concern through at least the next financial year beyond the year in question in terms of these accounts. So hopefully, just turning quickly to the recommendation, and happy to take any comments, of course, from board members. But the recommendation is that today the board, in the capacity of trustees of the charity, we approve the set of accounts and the annual report, following which myself and Kevin, as chair of Charitable Funds Committee, will then sign the accounts and the annual report later today. And the Auditor General for Wales will put on record the Audit Wales view of the independent examination of these accounts that they have undertaken tomorrow, ahead of us submitting them to the Charities Commission by the prescribed deadline of the 31st of January, so early next week. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Brilliant. Quickly across to Kevin as chair of Charitable Funds Committee. Any comment from your perspective?
Just very briefly, I think colleagues will know that we're on a journey with this part of business, and just to say, emphasise Chris's point about the Auditor General signing tomorrow, following approval by board today, hopefully. I would just point colleagues to paragraph 4 and paragraph 9, which really explain in writing what Chris has already alluded to for us. And the committee heard from the Audit Wales colleague, and there are no concerns going forward. There's plenty of work to do, but no concerns with regard to the accounts.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'll just pause there to see whether there are any comments or questions from the floor. That's good news. I think we take that as positive, Chris. So we're asked to approve the accounts, Chris, but also to confirm our assessment of the going concern capability of the fund.
Yes, please.
As per the recommendation at the end of the report. Are we happy to do that?
Yep, happy.
A job well done, I think. Excellent. I think some thanks are in order also, Chris. Did I see Gillian Gill's name mentioned in
absolutely. Jill Gill in my team in particular is increasingly working across with Estelle's team and Trish's team. It is coming together, as Kevin says. We've got a lot of work to do in this space still, but we are making good progress and some good joint working across a number of teams. So a number of thanks to people in terms of the year to date in question, but also the future work that we want to bring through on the charitable funds as well. So thank you for that.
We'll capture that in a minute. So thank you to Jill and colleagues, and we'll look for a set of words that reflects that. Okay, moving on, almost on running to time. I think we move on now to our standing orders, which are subject to review annually. Probably simplest, Trish, to pass straight across to yourself to guide us through another monumental piece of work. Amazing.
Yeah, Martin. So the standing orders are before the board today for review to take account of changes made by Welsh Government to the model standing orders last year. So you'll note that the standing orders include schedules which set out the scheme of matters reserved to the board, those delegated to executives and officers, the standing financial instructions and the terms of reference for board and advisory committee. So there's a big pack of papers there. The changes to the documents are set out in the covering paper. So I'll just draw out some key points, and then I'll pause at the end if there are any questions. So the changes to the main standing orders document are minor. Those changes are tracked, so I won't go through them. There's only a couple of them, not material. The standing financial instructions at Schedule 2.1 did have substantial changes that were made, but they weren't material in nature, that they were primarily to clarify sections. There was quite a bit of moving around and combining of sections to improve the flow of the document. And that's been reviewed by Chris and Jill as well, excuse me, for materiality. The main changes really are to the scheme of reservation and delegation at Schedule 1. And so this schedule is comprised of three parts. The first part is the items reserved to the board. And the markups show the changes there, and they go really primarily to improving flow, to improving clarity as well, especially around the delegated authority to the remuneration committee. And that'll be reflected in a change to their terms of reference as we go through effectiveness reviews in the next few weeks. The second table of that scheme of reservation in Schedule 1 is Table A, which are the matters delegated to executives and others. And the material changes, again, are marked up there primarily to reflect current portfolios and also moved around to improve the flow as well. The third part is Table B, which contains the financial delegations. This has been redrafted from the original Table B, and with the aim really to provide clarity around, particularly around the losses and special payments section, which we've pulled from the Welsh Government Manual for Accounts, and it also provides for guidance notes as we interpret these tables. You'll also see in a number of areas the delegated financial limit to the Chief Exec has been increased to 500,000, and those changes are identified throughout the document, and any flow on effect further down, and plus flow on effects to the board. I have actually noticed this morning that there are a couple of footnote errors in Table B. They don't affect the delegations, but I will correct them. There are corrections to be made to footnotes 9 and 10 in the losses and special payments section. But as I say, they don't affect the main delegations. Lastly, Schedules 3 and 4 are the operating arrangements for the board and committees. The terms of reference for the 7 board committees haven't been amended at this stage. They are as they were in March 2021. And any changes made as a result of the current effectiveness reviews will be reflected separately and will come through for the July board meeting. And similarly, with respect to the local partnership forum, where the operating arrangements are being revised to take account of the good practice developed during the pandemic, and they will come through separately as well. And just finally, Chair, the changes have been reviewed by the executive management team and by the audit committee. And the recommendation before the board today is for approval of the amended standing orders and the schedules. And I'll stop there.
Brilliant, thank you. I've just asked Martin as Chair of Audit for any perspective he would have on matters. They've obviously been supported, as you say, by Audit Committee.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work. I mean, this is a well worthwhile exercise, and it's, you know, some of the things like the delegated responsibilities going to the chief executive that have increased should make us a little bit more, make it a little bit easier to do things outside of the formal committee sessions, and probably has been one of the reasons we've had chair's actions actually. So yeah, some of these changes are going to be helpful, and as Trish knows, you know, every year you'll find something you can improve on in these documents, but they are important, and yeah, we've been through them, and everybody's pretty happy now. So yeah, we'd recommend that the board approve them.
Thank you, Martin. I mean, I actually went through the standing orders particularly, but also the SFIs in some detail, and a couple of things struck me, Trish, probably not for any discussion today, but firstly that the standing orders are very well written and essential tool for an incoming non-executive director to read them through and understand. I think the second point that struck me was there's a lot of technical formality set out in the documents, which inevitably sets a bar in terms of the exam we've got to pass to comply with absolutely everything to the letter. And I spotted one or two areas where I think offline the discussion would be useful about how we fulfill what's stipulated. So, for example, reference to the local partnership forum and our conduct of business with that, the role of remuneration, the role at the mechanics of appointment of CEO and executive directors, as reference to a committee to do that. So there's one or two areas where I think, without raising any alarm bells at all, it'd be worth us offline checking what the detail of that means in practice. And I noticed also, for example, reference to our dialogue with community health councils is referenced, and what that means for us as a board. So I think by way of follow-up, we can explore those things and provide further clarity, which is good because it keeps us on our toes, doesn't it? If there are any other comments, now's the chance. So those things I'll follow up with Trish. I don't think they alter the substance of what we're asked to approve. If you're happy, should we go to the recommendation? Going back to the, so we're asked to review and discuss the amendments. Well, Trish has summarised those for us. Standing orders, scheme of delegation, SFIs, and then to approve the changes to those documents. Are we happy to do that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amazing how so much work can be condensed into a few minutes, but plaudits, Trish, for this to get stuck into this review, bring this to board in the first few months of your term is brilliant. So thank you for that. Happy to move on, folks. We're actually 1 minute early on my clock, which is good news. The next item is to welcome actually our colleagues from EASC, who I did mention at the beginning. Stephen Harry, Chris Turner, hopefully, and Richard Baxter probably as a team to present to us on the activities of EASC, and no doubt prompt a discussion. We've got half an hour for this item, so I'm assuming our colleagues are here. I can see Richard there. In fact, I can see a room. Excellent. Now we have got a set of presentation slides in the papers, so I think we can take those as read, but we're in your hands, folks, as to how you want to play this.
Okay, thanks very much, Martin. Good morning to you and everyone else. First of all, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I think it's an important sort of interaction. I think that we should really build into the program each year. You mentioned that we're going to make a presentation. I think we'll go through that as quickly as possible, because what we really want to get at is a dialogue with you and the board, to see whether we've got some common ground where we need to do more work and how we can be as supportive as possible. So if we can go to the first slide, please, Richard.
Can I just check you can see that, Martin, please?
Can everyone see the slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yes, it's great.
Thank you. So just to start with, I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but this is our sort of organogram of how we fit into the system. So EASC is a joint committee of all the local health boards in Wales. I should point out there's no significance whatsoever in the fact that the committee and the Chief Ambulance Services Commissioner are in red. No significance attached to that whatsoever in this. But it shows, I think, what our underlying subcommittee structure is, and more particularly who we interact with. And you'll see down the right-hand side there, that the WAST Trust are represented on the committee. Jason is an associate member, and indeed, that adds greatly to our discussions. And Rachel Marsh also attends, and that's also very helpful. We do find it useful to have Jason and Rachel there, I must admit. I don't want to spend too much time on that. You're probably all familiar with it, so we'll move on. And I'm sure you're all aware of what the Commission services are, so we won't spend any time on that either. The Minister's priorities, well, these are sort of well-known ones. I think Martin and I have both recently had our chair's objectives sent to us, and so I can possibly update those a little bit. Certainly, I think one of the things that came through in mine, and I assume in Martin's as well, is a much greater emphasis on our joint, if you like, contribution to the 6 goals of urgent and emergency care. I don't think we've seen it as specific than that in my priorities previously, but it's certainly there now. And the other objectives that have been set for us, I think, are how well we can work together, how EASC as a committee of chief executives of health boards can support WAST in delivering its plans for sustained improvement and so on. I think we know what we have to do. I think the question is, how well can we do it? And we are certainly committed to trying to do that. I should also say that I think, Jason and Stephen here are in constant touch, and I know it's almost more than once a week. I think they have formal meetings, and certainly Martin and I have quarterly meetings, which Martin can speak for himself, but I find them very helpful in setting some of our priorities and getting a better mutual understanding. So I think if I
We seem to have lost them, Martin.
Yeah, we do. Let's see whether they can get back in. The punchline. Jason, I wonder, you might have quicker to hand a contact for Stephen, perhaps message them.
Yeah, I'll give him a ring.
For those watching, apologies. This is a technical failure, we believe. Not a deliberate pause. We're just reaching the crucial point there in that presentation. So we'll hold a second.
He's not picking up, Martin. I wonder if we should perhaps press on with another item, and if they rejoin us, revert back.
Yes. Now we've got Beth Ann joining us 11:10. I think we probably need to take a short item aside from that. I'm just looking down the agenda. We may need to break out of the order if we're going to take a short item. I just wondered, Trish, whether we could take the assurance framework and risk register at this point. It seems a bit anomalous, but
I was going to suggest the same thing, actually.
Yeah, because the IMTP item's slightly longer, and we'll start a big discussion, I suspect. Not to disparage your paper, but
no, that's fine. Sorry, I've just got the sun streaming through, so I'll just move. So if you'd like me to go through that now, Chair.
If you could, yeah.
Great. So there are currently 16 key risks before the board, and just to confirm, the board committees have had an opportunity to review these risks within their remit and continue to do so at each meeting. You'll see that work has commenced to review the high-rated risks in more detail now that we have some more space and time for that formal review. We've also got some short-term resources to help us with those reviews in the risk management team and to ensure that they're agreed through those appropriate governance pathways with the ADLT and the executive management team before they come back here for the March board. So that detailed formal review will include a fresh look at how these high-rated risks are described, as well as updating the controls, the assurances and the actions, particularly where those actions are shown to have completed and to show they should be showing positively to influence the risk rating review as well. So that's ongoing. There are meetings in the diary and have commenced. So in addition, the paper sets out the new and developing risks, those that are emerging and which will appear on future risk registers relating to resources funding, cyber, decarbonisation and patient safety, to name a few. So I won't go into them in any detail here, Chair, because until they're rated and the controls are identified, that will give us a fuller explanation for discussion through committees and at board, but just so that it's on your radar. There is one risk which is recommended for closure, and that's risk 225, which is the on-call CCA ability to cover 24/7 command. And that's due to new duty operational manager structure being in place and sufficient capacity to enable appropriate cover. So that risk has reduced in score from a 16 to an 8 and therefore reached its target rating. So we would ask that that is closed. So on to the recommendation, which is the board is asked to receive assurances on the contents of the report, specifically relating to the activity since the last meeting, and also a recommendation that's not clear in there in the recommendation section, but also to approve the closure of risk 225. And you might recall at the last meeting of the board, we said that we would have the board continue to approve closure of risks until such time as our new procedure and policy codifies what that will look like. So I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you, Tris, for handling that in somewhat ad hoc fashion, unexpectedly. That's very clear. I think what the gist of what you're saying is that there's a lot of activity that will be reflected quite soon in the report. So you're signalling changes in terms of things that we'll be starting to build in. Because I picked up, for example, on the cybersecurity issue that we heard about at board development, thinking clearly we need to factor that into the register at the next iteration, which is what you're signalling, isn't it?
Yeah, in particular, that one has been started to be developed as well. It's quite advanced, so I've no doubt that that will appear on the next register. So we're working closely with Andy on that one. See, there is a lot of work to do on the maturity journey of risk generally, but focusing right now on those high-rated risks, just so that we've got all of the information before the board to help with the management of those.
Yeah, I think we've got a question from Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Trish, I note in the paper that it talks about a desktop exercise looking at health boards and how they identify their corporate risks and whether there's a relationship with ours. Has that been completed is the first question. And the second one is, do board secretaries look across the system to see whether the risks from health boards and ourselves and other trusts actually marry up and reflect the risk across the system? Bit of a complex question, the second one, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Paul. So I have to give thanks to Julie Bolch, the head of risk and corporate governance, and all the work that she does for risk. And certainly she has undertaken a desktop exercise just to see where, certainly with respect to handover delays, there may be a correlation or any of those high-rated risks. And that work continues because their risk registers are being updated on a regular basis as well. And yes, the board secretaries are part of a wider risk management group as well. So bringing best practice in and looking at risks right across the board. And there is an All Wales DATEX, which is going to be introduced that we're working on as well. So that will allow us to have a bit more consistency of reporting as well. So there's some joined up thinking there. But again, still a lot of work to do in this space, I think, Paul, and the risk management transformation program that went to the audit committee at a high level is what we're starting to pull out now, and all of that will be included. So cross-referencing as much as possible to make sure that those risks are described in a very rich way, and the controls are very clear, and the actions to plug those gaps.
Yeah, I think it would be really helpful, Trish, because we talk about the system, the health and social care system, but we don't necessarily take account of each other's corporate risks and bring them together. So that would be really helpful. Thanks, Trish. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Paul. And I think Kevin broadly endorsing that. Estelle, I think you must have your hand up in effect. You're on mute.
Sorry, Martin. No, I didn't. That was me in error, not coming off video. So my apologies.
Okay. Any other comments, Martin? You're on mute as well, Martin.
Sorry, I had to press 2 buttons then. Must be a different system. Anyway, yeah, I like this report, and the one problem with it is, though, it asks more questions sometimes than it answers, and that's the nature of risk management, I guess. One point I was going to make, though, is, and this is a question maybe for you, Martin, is with the higher risks, those in red, I'm wondering whether the board should have more than just this report in relation to some of, I think we might have talked about this before. It's the issue of where the board itself gets involved rather than its subcommittees. I'm not sure what your view is on that. It's, some of these things are very high risk issues. They are politically sensitive issues potentially. And we don't maybe get the opportunity to discuss them at board level, whereas they are discussed in the committees. It may be a question that we ask ourselves later, but it just crossed my mind that maybe the board itself should spend a little bit more time understanding some of these, because I have to admit, I don't understand some of them in detail. I understand the outline of the risk, if you like, but the detail of them I don't get at all. Particularly with things like the risk of personal injury claims, sightings, COVID exposure, for example, is one that's now put in as 20, very high risk, but I don't know much about it. Anyway, the point coming back, though, is, should the board spend more time on the higher risk issues, or should we leave it to our committees?
Can I come in, and then Trish might wish to offer a view? I think I agree with you, actually. I mean, the committees obviously do a lot of work, but there's something about us collectively thinking about what the worry list is. It's probably something, Trish, that we could allocate time for through board development to enhance our understanding of what we're talking about. Because I think the point you've made is sometimes what's captured doesn't reflect the true risk. There's a kind of mental process to go through to get to the point of defining what the risk is and being clear. Maybe some time in that territory would both help the report and also our board's shared understanding of what's really keeping us awake, because it's that element, it sits outside process in a way, doesn't it? If you're a chair of a board or board member, there are things that will worry you, and if they worry you, they need to be on that register. So I don't know what your thoughts would be.
So I think that there's a couple of things there. I think that the articulation of the risk in an if-then resulting in will help with a better understanding of the risk. The risk management project will point us in a direction whereby we have the board assurance framework, which will be your key risks, and that will drive deep dives, it will drive the agenda, and we will particularize how that will work. So there's still very much a role for the committees, but the board will be looking at those that bubble up the top, and it will be reflected through the agenda. So I think that there is a lot of work to come in this program that we'll be delivering over the next sort of year or so. And I think, yes, education and training, I think, is part of that as well. So there is more to come on this, plus guidance as to how we will manage that through boards and committees, so we're not duplicating.
Yeah, thank you. So I think point taken, Martin. Now, I'm conscious that we've now got our commissioners back in the audience, but Emrys, before we leave this report, you've got a comment?
Yes, thanks, Martin. I think Martin Turner has a good point in terms of what comes to the board, but I'm also very conscious and pleased of Trish's work in this, because at Finance Performance, we've questioned some of the descriptions in the risk and the validity of them, which are being addressed. So there's a whole raft of these things that need a review, and maybe others will come to the fore. So I think it's work in progress. I'm happy to support the recommendations, and I think it's really a good demonstration that we are starting to get into risk and use that to manage the organisation. So I support everything that's been said. Thank you.
Thanks, Emrys. That's really helpful. A wise counsel there. I'm going to push us to the recommendation on the report, which is to we're asked to receive assurance on the contents of the report, specifically related to the risk management activity that's taken place since the last meeting in November, and also the board assurance framework itself. So we're happy to receive the report on that basis.
Apologies, Chair. Also apologies, Chair. Also to close 225.
I'm sorry, yeah, good point. I made a note of that as well, and also to approve the closure of risk 225.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Good. Thank you, Trish, for stepping in there. We'll go back to our reporters on the ground with our commissioners. We have radio contact.
Thank you, Martin. We're not sure at what point we dropped off, because we've been presenting to ourselves, I think, for the last 10 minutes. How much did you hear of our presentation?
You've been gone, I think, 15 minutes. So I think you got to the point of saying that you valued the contact with myself, right? Which was quite early on in the slides. So if I'll stay on audio, if you wouldn't mind putting the slides back up, we can recapture the point where you.
I think we were on the ministerial.
Ministerial priorities. We were, yes.
Priorities.
Right. And you're articulating thoughts around those. So it's probably quite early on. I'm just conscious we've got a bit of a backlog now.
Would it be okay? We're a bit worried, Martin, that putting the slides up may crash the system again, because we think that's what may have happened. So if we just speak very briefly to the slides and try and do it as quickly as possible, would that be okay?
That would be brilliant. So colleagues, if you've got the slides in the board papers, so they're there for your reference. So we'll go back to Chris. We've got a staff story with Ethan Williams joining us that we need to take in about a quarter of an hour, so we just have to see how we get on.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Martin. Apologies for the failure.
Understood.
Okay. Well, I think when I was talking about ministerial priorities, I think what I wanted to say was simply that we've moved on a little bit. You and I have both had our objectives set now quite recently. And one of the things I just wanted to pick out, certainly from mine, and I suspect it may be in perhaps a related form in yours, relates to the specific reference to the 6 goals of urgent and emergency care, something we haven't seen as quite explicitly stated as that before. The rest of my objectives really relate to the collaborative nature of how we work together and ensuring that, you know, we're mutually supportive in achieving our objectives. I'll leave it at that and just pass over to Stephen to try to recap.
So I'll pick up the slide if I can. Thanks, Martin. So again, apologies. So I'll pick up the slide on transformation, which is inverting the triangle, as I think we're sort of now calling it, which I think is great. From an East perspective, obviously there's general support for that concept in terms of the need to do that as part of the reset and transformation of health and social care services. But obviously, implementation and delivery is key to that. So how we lock that in and how we're clear about that is going to be important. We know that the balance between protecting core service and doing transformation is going to be a difficult one to strike. But I think we need to be mindful of that and make sure that we're not jeopardizing core service at the cost of transformation, or being slow with transformation and being too cautious about core service delivery. So there's a balance to be struck in terms of that. We think that having a phased implementation so that triangle won't turn itself. So how do we sort of click the triangle around? What does that phased implementation look like? How do we pause? How do we pause in that and make sure we're reviewing impact and learn from that and then move on is important. And obviously we are adapting the commissioning framework to make sure it aligns and enables and encourages that transformation process, as well as protecting core service delivery. I'll move on then to the 6 goals for urgent and emergency care. There are a number of those goals which are very relevant, I think, to core ambulance service delivery, but also to the transformation that you've committed to as a board, that you want to deliver as a board, which we welcome. The traditional, I think, goal that we link into would be goal 4, which is rapid response in physical or mental health crisis. That would be the one which fits most to the core service model. There are others then which are relevant and we need to link into in terms of your ambitions around that mobile clinical service for patients that need an urgent response, and also for the opportunities in terms of linking up communication and clinical advice services, the gateway to care type service that you've described. And then finally, in terms of NEPS services, how we're making sure that we're aligning the delivery of NEPS services to the transformation of planned care services, and also to support service change with the development of transfer and discharge type services. So again, we welcome that. I think that's a good way forward, and we can see how we can align and work together in terms of trying to enact some of those changes. Talk briefly about 111 and links across to 111. 111, we know in a relatively short period of time will be pan Wales, so there will be a 111 service across Wales, and the 111 service will probably need to move from a program type arrangement into a more of a commissioning style of approach, and we think that's the right thing to do because we think there are some opportunities there. We'd be keen to make sure that those are as simple and as straightforward as they can and as integrated as they can be, to avoid confusion, to avoid duplication, to make sure things don't slip between the net. And we'll work together in terms of what those options might look like and how those might move forward. But we're keen to try and get some clarity around that. It's important. I think we get clarity for everybody's sake in that regard. In terms of IMTP and the commissioning intentions, our ambition, as it is every year, is to make sure that we're able to support your IMTP and that you will have an approvable IMTP. We see no reason why that shouldn't be the case. We're working closely on that. We're meeting on a regular basis now between now and the end of March to make sure that we can facilitate that and work that through. There are always things that we need to continue to work on in that regard, but I remain confident that we'll be able to be in a position where we will be able to do that. And obviously, the East IMTP will need to align with the West IMTP, and I'm sure it will in terms of the work that we're doing. There's some challenges in that, but there always are. But we'll, by working closely together and being on the same page, I think we can get there on that. Also, we've taken a slightly different approach to commissioning intentions this year. We made them a bit more straightforward, and we think that's helping in terms of that development and delivery of both IMTP and the change to the commissioning framework. I've gone to the last slide, which is around some key issues and expectations. handover delays are at an unacceptable level, and we're determined to reduce the level of handover delays and to make sure that's a key focal point. The system can't operate safely with the current level of handover delays it has, and we need, EASC have agreed some red lines in terms of handover delays. We now need to make sure that we have robust improvement plans that sit behind those, and those are monitored and implemented at pace. It's really important that we do that. We struck a collaborative arrangement with you around demand and capacity. EASC made a significant investment into WAST, and WAST have committed to deliver some efficiencies as part of that arrangement, both in terms of roster changes and also in terms of some policy and post-production hour efficiencies. Those are hugely important to deliver. We know you recognise that, and it's the basis. It's important for the basis of this collaborative arrangement that we have between us. We know you're committed to do that, and we will provide you with every encouragement, if I can put it that way, to make sure that we get those things over the line. Really important we do that. PTAS, we think, is important, and we welcome the role that you're playing in that, and we're going to provide you with a bit of support with health boards in terms of making sure health boards realise those opportunities as well. Mental health is sometimes not mentioned and not given a high enough priority. We regard it as a key priority. Slight change this year. Instead of getting a direct allocation from Welsh Government for mental health services, that's now coming through the commissioning process, which we think is the right thing to do. And it also allows us to link up with broader mental health programmes, but it's a key priority. We need to recognise it as a key priority. We also welcome the work that you'll be doing on utilisation. We think that's a good initiative, a good way of trying to measure variation across Wales and then have models of service that allow us to reflect the local circumstances and needs that we've got across Wales. And we think utilisation is a good way of delivering that. So I'll stop there, Martin. It was a bit of a whistle-stop tour because of the technical difficulties we've had, but we've tried to create a little bit of time for any questions if you or any of the members wish to do so.
I think we've got as we brought one item forward, folks, I think we've got a little bit of time. So if we could ask for Beth Ann's forbearance with staff experience, if you could stay with us, we'll get to that by 20 past. And I think then break at 11:40 rather than 11:30 as planned. So we've got about 10 minutes or so, commissioner colleagues, for a discussion on this, which I hope would be helpful. And I think just my comment before we start would be, there's an awful lot of ground there that, you know, is I recognise. We seem to be talking the same language about change. The triangle is now adopted terminology, isn't it? So that's all good from my perspective. And got to say, I'm not seeing any surprises in that your presentation, which is a good thing, because it's saying we are communicating effectively and picking up on the right order of things. So on that note, Kevin, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks to these colleagues for the presentation. I just welcome your view on red lines there, Stephen, because you know, clearly there are things to go out there. I take us back to slide number 6, which is the 6 priorities, funnily enough, and I guess all 6 are really key to the patient experience, but you know, 1 to 4 especially so. And what strikes me as a barrier to transformation is our is getting to tackle 5 and 6. You know, timely discharge is a really critical factor in all of this, and we know there are patients fit for discharge who simply can't leave hospital for any number of reasons. And a couple of patient groups that I'm involved with tell me that, you know, simple things like, you know, in hospitals, getting the pharmacy discharge medication in a timely fashion is a barrier. Getting an assessment at home so oxygen can be used at home. One patient told me that they were fit for discharge before Christmas, but were told their home assessment couldn't happen until mid-January. other alternatives were put in place, but you know, those things seem to be common. I just wonder, in your conversations, are you getting into that kind of, you know, we've got to think of discharge as a you know, discharge planning as early as possible in the patient's pathway?
Yeah, a few issues there, Kevin. I'll try and pick them up separately if I could. On the red line issue, I think the most important element about that red line issue is that we know that we have increased clinical risk and the potential for harm in the system if we don't tackle these issues. And I think that's the key way to look at this, look at it through that lens, rather than look at it through a numbers lens. The numbers result in these things happening, and focusing on those issues, I think, is the right way to do it. On the issue of flow, I agree with you. One of the pieces of work that we're doing within the NCCU to support the system is a common approach to escalation, so that there are 4 levels of escalation in health board escalation plans, and there is variation in terms of how those are applied and what best practice looks like. So I think we're on version 20 now, Kevin. We're on version 20 of a joined up escalation plan. We're having conversations with Lee and colleagues about how that links up to the ODU and the WAST escalation plan, because it's important that we do that. And I'm hopeful that we'll get that over the line in February. So we'll then have health boards working to a common set of approaches and doing the right thing. If we've got that, then we can encourage best practice, or the flip side of that is, if it's not being done, we can require best practice to be delivered. So that gives us, I think, a sound basis. I think in terms of the measurement side of things, the Minister has just published a set of key measures across the whole system as part of the planning framework. And there is a measure in there on delayed transfers, which I think is quite important. We've got a condensed set of measures now, and delayed transfers is one of those. So I think what's been highlighted, particularly in the last 3 or 4 months, about the pressures across the whole system and in social care and at the back door, is sort of bringing this to a head, really. So it's an important point. I agree with you, and a key element to unlocking the system. I agree with you.
Great, thank you very much.
See if there's any more faces appearing. I've got Paul. I'll go to you now. I've got a couple of thoughts myself.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Stephen, Chris. Yeah, I think it does reflect our plans in WAS, which is really helpful. The one thing that I wanted to pick up, Stephen, was around the mental health element. You've highlighted in the improvement plan and expectations the 999 element of mental health, but we are seeing increasingly the 111 element. So picking up the 111 issue, I think we need to think about mental health in the broader sense, not just the crisis element that comes through 999. And I just wonder how we start to think about that aspect of mental health care services rather than just the crisis. Because a lot of our patients will seek 111 advice, and in that conversation we identify there's a mental health issue.
Yeah, one of the I agree, Paul. So what we also know, I think, is that people who are presenting with mental health or well-being issues, waiting a long time to get a phone answered and get it is absolutely the wrong thing for them, and they will present in the wrong part of the system for them as a consequence of that. So getting that timely response is important. So one of the initiatives there is the Press 2 for mental health. So actually, if you're presenting with this, you haven't got to wait in a queue. You press 2, and then you go through to a hub, which will be able to provide you with some specific and particular advice and avoid you going into, and those hubs will then link with health board services and with third sector services and so on and so forth. There is money that's been made available for that out of the mental health allocation for next year, and there is a specific allocation being made available for 111 Press 2 is the sort of jargon we're using, but for mental health and wellbeing services. Second is we're trying to develop specific transport services for mental health, because we think that's important. Deputy Minister is supportive of that, and again, resources have been made available, and we're working with you in terms of how we can contract with maybe third sector services in terms of trying to provide that service. So it's backed up with a bit of resource as well, Paul. So we've got the ideas plus a bit of resource plus some 2 or 3 key priorities which we need to test. And I think if we look at it that way, we can start to make some progress. I won't deal with it totally, but we can definitely start to make some progress.
Yeah, I would agree, Stephen. And I think that if that slide reflected the 111 as well as the 999, I'd be more comfortable, I suppose.
Yeah, I think there's always, as we move on, there's going to be this closer relationship anyway between 999 and 111, isn't it? Which is why I wanted to put that specific slide in on 111, because the sooner we work out how we're going to join those things up, the better. It's moving from a program into a different arrangement now. We've got to take advantage. We've got to take best advantage of what that brings, I think, particularly around the core service.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Chair.
A question from me, probably you, Stephen, but Chris equally, I guess. Is there anything that you would have us do differently? I don't mean that in terms of service change. I think the ground looks pretty. We seem to be on shared ground there. But in terms of our approach to things, is there any message you'd like us as a board to absorb in terms of the way we work with you, in terms of the priority we give to things, so to speak? So it's a very broad question.
Okay, I think one of the things I think it's a relationship which is developing well, Martin. So I think we need to keep on doing what we're doing, and the relationship will mature, and I think that will be for the good of everybody, particularly patients, if we continue to do that. So I think that's the first thing to say. I think if I was in the place to say, well, what is it that we need to understand better in terms of your position as a board? And it's about risk appetite, I think. So it's about how are we going to get the right balance between what the level of risk, which as a statutory body, you're prepared to take as an organisation, and the level of risk that we as commissioners need to take. So I think if we don't do that, have a sensible way through that, we won't get across the line some of those things that we need to get across the line. Maybe we can do that as a proof of concept. Who knows? But there's ways that means we can do that, because we know that the financial position is going to tighten over the next 2 or 3 years. So understanding how we've got that shared risk and how we're managing that shared risk, I think actually will be welcomed by the system. And being clear about how we're going to do that, I think is really important. If we wait for things to be approved all of the time, or for perfection on things, we're not going to achieve this transformation at the pace that we need to achieve it. So there's a bit of maturity in that side of it, I think, which could help, Martin.
I think that's a very valid point. I understand there's things that we probably can't air in this forum about that sort of financial context, which we're working through at the moment. Paul's flashed up a comment which I agree with, which we probably need to spend some time together talking about risk, different concepts of that. We talked as a board about developing assurance framework and the reporting to board around risk. And actually getting into more depth about what are the top worries for us. Risk appetite is inherently part of that discussion. It would make sense for us to then be talking with you. We maybe need a short workshop type approach to this, where we explore mutual concepts of risk. I think that will probably flush out a lot of any issues that haven't been surfaced.
Both Chris and I are nodding furiously at that, Martin. So we're very much on that page, and we're sure that the 80-20 rule will apply here. You know, there's going to be more that we will agree about in terms of that than we will disagree about. And I think that's quite important that we do that, actually.
Yeah, and quite soon, Chris, in the comments here, Chris Turley has endorsed that as well. As long as we have transparency about decision making and what the understanding of risks and so on. So I think he's effectively saying, yeah, that's a good thought. Paul, you wanted to come back on it as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking that as a board, we receive the minutes of ISK, and obviously we get Rachel and Jason to feedback on ISK. But I just wonder on this particular issue whether the board and the committee work together in like a workshop to really understand each other's level of risk appetite, because it's not just the individual organisations. It has to be a system-wide risk appetite. And we don't get that opportunity as a board, do we, to engage at that level on something like this. So I would welcome that opportunity going forward, really.
And our board secretary is enthusiastic as well, because it fits with our risk journey, so to speak. I'm conscious of time, folks. I know we've been interrupted. Chris, did you?
Yeah, just very quickly, can I say I support very much that working together around the risk agenda. I think that would be really helpful. And my other comment would be, you started off after the presentation by saying there was nothing you didn't recognise in there, and I think that's the point, really. I think if we work on the basis of no surprises, no surprises from our end, no surprises from your end, give us early sight of anything that's being proposed, and we would commit to do the same, then I think we can make a lot of progress, because there is potential for conflict between us, but I've not seen it, and it's certainly not part of the way we operate to encourage any conflict. What we want to do is work collaboratively, and I'm pleased to say that from my point of view that happens a lot. Let's make sure it continues.
Fitting words, I think, to draw to a close. I'm sorry we lost each other technically, and it made for a somewhat disrupted discussion. It was quite good, though, in view of that last point around risk and putting our heads together, that we actually took our risk report while you were absent talking to yourselves, because it teed it up quite nicely. So that's quite a good outcome from things. I do appreciate your time today, got to say, putting together the slides, coming to the board. I think it's all part of the relationship and good to do. And from my perspective, I endorse your comments, Chris. I don't see, I can see sometimes tension where we're dealing with difficult subjects, but I don't see a poor relationship. I see a relationship that is continuing to develop positively. And I think that risk workshop idea might be another stage in its development. So thank you all for joining us. You're very welcome to stay, but I suspect you may have other things to get crack on with. So we'll leave you and turn back to our staff story.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so I think we're broadly okay to carry on up to 20 to 12, if you're happy with that, and then we'll resume at 11:45. Sue, I'm really grateful to you, short notice, joining us as interpreter and staying with us right up until now. I recognise that you need to go after this item. So thank you for your efforts today. Claire, shall I pass over to you to make the introductions? Because I know we've got Bethan waiting patiently in the wings.
Yeah, diolch, thank you, Chair. So I'm really delighted this morning to be able to introduce to Trust Board one of our nurses working in the 111 service, Bethan. Bethan shared her story of working through the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic, with us at our professional nurse forum a number of months ago. And we really felt that her story was a very powerful story. And we really felt that the board would be very interested to hear that story. So I'm delighted to say that Bethan is with us this morning. Bethan is going to share her personal story with us, and we're very grateful for her agreeing to do that. And then I'm sure we'll have a little bit of time for some questions and discussions afterwards. So welcome, Bethan. Lovely to have you with us this morning. And over to you to share with the board members what you shared with us at our professional nurse forum a little while ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for the invite to participate today. I'll say now what I said during the professional nurse forum. I truly don't believe myself to be that interesting, but I will tell you about myself nonetheless. So yeah, I am a nurse. I've worked for the Trust now since 2019, initially within 111, but more recently now I've made the leap across to the clinical support desk. So yeah, here's my story. So during the early stages of the pandemic, I felt very conflicted. My personal circumstances are that I have a husband that is awaiting a kidney transplant and is on home dialysis. So our home is a treatment centre. It's a home where we raise 2 children, and it then became a home that I worked from. In the initial stages of the pandemic, before home working was introduced within the service, I felt afraid to go to work. I was worried that I was going to bring COVID home to my family, in particular my husband. And we knew at that point that mortality rates with patients with long-standing chronic conditions were high. We knew that the outcomes weren't great, and at that point we were being told that intensive care beds were being kept for patients that would have the best outcomes. And so, knowing what we knew about race, we knew that that may not potentially be good. So I wanted to homework. I was afraid to go to work, and I was conflicted. I didn't know whether I should move out of the family home, which would then have left Reece and the children homeschooling, and Reece doing all of his treatment and needing to be well enough to be able to look after the children, which sometimes isn't the case. But I felt like I was letting my profession down in the other hand. You know, we were seeing all of these nurses and healthcare workers being called to arms, and everybody was running to the storm, and I felt as if I was running away from it, and that didn't sit comfortably with me. So after the support of senior members of staff and after engaging my union, I was afforded the opportunity to work from home, and it enabled me then to feel as if I was part of the fight against COVID. Sounds a bit cliche, that does, doesn't it? But I wanted to do my part. I'm a very passionate nurse. I'm very patient focused, and I wanted to be able to give the best of me at a time where I also needed to give the best of myself at home. And that was a very difficult balance to find. But it opened up other opportunities for me as well, because I was able to keep my family safe. I was supported in doing that by working from home. And it opened up avenues with what then became my union work, and led me to cross paths with wonderful people who have helped to shape my direction with where I want to go with my career. I'll be entering into my 20th year of nursing as a qualified nurse next year, which makes me feel very old. But I've never pushed myself. I've always trundled along. And actually, I'm very thankful. It's going to sound bizarre, but I'm very thankful for COVID. I'm very thankful to COVID, I should say, not for COVID, because it gave us as a family a chance to spend time together that, you know, with an uncertain future, we won't get back. And it also enabled me to decide where I wanted to go as a professional. I think, you know, the vision within WAST at the moment is something that I'm totally on board with, and I'm glad to be a part of. And in that respect, COVID has encouraged me as a professional, as an individual, to push myself more, to do things that are way out of my comfort zone that I would never have done before. I think my mother thinks it's a midlife crisis, and I'm fine with that. But, you know, from the point of view of staff well-being, I've become so much more engaged with, you know, looking at ways to achieve well-being, and part of that was actually realising that I needed to achieve well-being for myself, because I was pouring from an empty cup, and the self-realisation of that was quite a bizarre thing, and what it's done, what it's given me is, is the drive to try and ensure that my colleagues are, are well supported from a well-being point of view, and to really shout from the rooftops about the things that we do well to support staff. Ultimately, I'm a nurse and I'm a carer. I'm a mother, and somewhere in there, obviously, I am a person as well. And what the pandemic allowed me to do was actually discover who I was as a person again. Again, sounds a little bit sentimental, that does, but that was where I was. That was, that was the direction that my life was headed in. And at 42 now, I'm challenging myself to do things that I wouldn't have done before. And it's never always positive, but I think there are lots of positives to draw out of the experience that I've had on a personal and professional level. And we have to focus on the positives, because if I focused on the negatives, I probably would never leave the house. So that's my story, to try and continue to be the best that I can, and be thankful for absolutely every opportunity that I'm given, to be able to do that, to be the best nurse that I possibly can, and that's me.
Bethan, thank you ever so much for sharing that story, and although I've heard it before, I still find it really powerful to have an insight into what you were faced with in that early stage in the pandemic, and that dilemma between keeping your family and indeed your husband safe. And you're right, we need to remember what it was like in the early stages of the pandemic, the real concern about ITU bed availability, what we were hearing about, really clinically vulnerable people in terms of, what the chances were for them if they contracted the virus. And for you to be in that position where you were having to think about your family and think about your professional responsibility and the call to arms and the feeling that you wanted to do both, and then to hear that working from home enabled you to be able to balance them is an amazing story, and I think benefits all of us to hear what really was a very positive experience for you in being able to work from home. And I'm sure that, one of the things of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone is indeed coming to Trust Board today to share that story. So a huge thank you for me, and I'll pass back to Chair now. Thank you, Bethan.
Thank you.
Bethan, you're a star. You're very, very modest, but your modesty is, it's an enthralling story and a tribute to your tenacity and adversity. And it's brilliant that you've thought through that well-being side of things. It's something that actually strikes a chord with me. I think it can, the neglect of personal well-being can afflict people right through organisations, can't it? You can only love others if you love yourself, so to speak. So very powerful. And I'm sure there'll be a few questions on the back of it, which I hope you're happy to take. And brave of you, I've got to say, come to this meeting with 20 faces dipping in and out, which is probably pretty unnerving, but it came across really well. So thank you. We've got 3 hands up there. Can you see 3 hands up there at the top? I'll go to Kevin first, then Craig, and then Emrys.
Great, Bethan, thank you very much. So I'm Kevin Davis, and I'm also a nurse, so you shouldn't feel old at 20 years in, because I'm 44 years in and still going. So, but thank you again. And I think there are a number, I've got more comments than a question, really. I think what you've highlighted in a very humble way is that we've all got families or significant others or people we care about behind the scenes, even though we're trying to do what we do as best we can. And I think, the positive that you're describing out of adversity is a really powerful message. And I just wonder, Paul Hollard's put in the chat about, the message needs to go far and wide. And I just wonder whether, you know, you'd be up for putting pen to paper and sharing this with maybe the nursing standard or something like that as a kind of a you know, an information piece or a personal reflection piece, for two reasons. I think it would be really valuable for the profession, but I also think people would find real value in revalidation terms against the story you tell, because I think it's that powerful. So, you know, have a think about it. And, you know, obviously you're in touch with Claire. If I can help in any way with that process, I'd be very happy to do so. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Probably applies to other professional groups as well, doesn't it? The principles are exactly the same. But thank you, Kevin. That's a really helpful suggestion. We'll go to Craig.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Bethan. And Bethan and I know each other very well. And
so you must know
together. Yes, we've worked together for, and it's more of a comment that I'd like to make. And it's Craig Brown, I'm one of the TU reps at Trust Board for the RCN. I just want to make some comments about the background teams that support our home workers, and in particular call out the IT team on this, because whilst it was a very challenging time for us to go from a couple of trials with some of the equipment to rapidly trying to keep people at home and support them from an IT perspective, I think sometimes we forget some of that backroom functions. And I think we've just got to call that team out just to make sure that they're fully engaged. And I know Andy's here today. And aware of the support that they provided to enable Bethan to stay working at home. And I think, you know, that has continued, and I think it's a model that we need to carry on rolling out further. We know that there are certain parts of Wales that are not covered by some of our contact centres, and that there are nurses in maybe mid Wales at the moment, certain parts of maybe Pembrokeshire, Ceredigion, that would add an awful lot to our workload, workforce. And this is another area I think that we need to really focus on. So a big thank you to the IT team, but more work to be done to try and increase our recruitment in those areas as well. But thank you, Bethan.
Great comments, Craig. Thank you. And Andy's signalled his appreciation of your comments as well. We go to Emrys and then Bethan. Hope you can keep up with this, Bethan.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Bethan. I'm Emrys Davis. I'm a non-exec. I did chair the Quality and Safety Committee and now the Finance and Performance Committee. The story you bring is really powerful, and I appreciate that. And I think it represents a lot more people than we think, because your story struck a chord with me, because I personally am shielding. I'm looking after my 95-year-old father in the middle of that. And I think the key message in this is family, because the impact of you know, shielding and having to look after an old parent who lives 50 miles away means that, you know, travel is difficult and the lockdowns, and it's the impact on the family of what you have to do and how you have to look after yourself. So I think bringing that story to a wider audience is really appreciated. And I think also your challenge to yourself and what you can do. Well, I've got a few years on you because I'm 70 and I'm still trying to challenge myself. So that's a lifetime sort of ambition. So well done for doing that. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Praise indeed, that's brilliant. Bethan, to Bethan, just to confuse me.
Thank you, Chair. Bethan, most of my colleagues have raised the points that I wanted to make. However, there's just one or two things I'd like to add. I really want to thank you so much for coming along today, because I think it takes an awful lot of courage to admit openly about that conflict that you felt. And I know through my day job from talking with other people, there are many others out there that have equally felt your conflict, but also felt an internal pressure, you know, for the call to arms. So the honesty and the openness that you shared your story with us today, there were points that I actually had goosebumps, genuinely. And I think that's because I could feel the reality of your story, your emotions, the truth of what you were saying, the meaning of those words to you absolutely shone through. I really liked, you know, Kevin's suggestion about if you felt able to and wanted to put the story to paper, because I think there really is something there that others could grab hold of. My final comment is that I'm so pleased that we in WAST as well were able to help you resolve that conflict and find a balance that worked for you in terms of working from home, where you were able to be there for your family and give them the extra protection you felt you wanted to do and needed to do, but also still contribute in your own inimitable way. So thank you so much for coming. It really is much appreciated.
Thank you.
Jason.
Thanks, Martin. Similar comments to everyone else. Beth, and thanks for coming along and sharing your story today. Of course, the personal aspect of this is really powerful. I suppose my question is slightly different, and you know, let's hope and pray that we never have to go through this again. You know, the experience that we've all had that's been, you know, very challenging for us for different reasons, you know, touching us professionally and personally through the last 2 years. But if we were to have to experience something similar in the future, what would your advice be about what we would do differently?
I feel like I'm in a job interview now. I think empathy is probably the key. While I realise that there's a service to provide and that it needs to be, you know, exceptionally high standard of service, in order to achieve that, I think we all need to have empathy that, you know, like I say, I genuinely don't think I'm that interesting, but I also didn't want to sell a sob story, because I have so much that I'm thankful for, that, you know, it's not a depressing life to have. It's, you know, it's wonderful. But I think that in terms of how we do things differently, I think that there needs to be empathy that isn't forced.
Okay, forced or forced?
Forced.
Forced, okay.
Yeah.
All right, forced.
Because
okay.
every individual has a story to tell. But to get the best out of people, then, you know, it's about adapting to their story.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
It's interesting. There's something also about feeling able to share what you might perceive personally as weakness, but as actually strength, and the organisation accepting that. So you being honest about the situation at home, and that radiates for me with, you know, I have difficult home circumstances of a different kind. I think it's important we should feel that we can share that and get genuine empathy through the organisation, that's recognised, we're all real people. So it strikes a big chord for me. I think probably we need to draw to a close, but it struck me also you made comments really that are a signal of ambition. You know, you're saying you're really up for the vision of the organisation, which suggests that maybe opportunity will present for you. We're hearing a lot today about future plans and 111 and so on. So I think we should encourage you and colleagues to feel that you can offer views about that journey and how we develop, because obviously we had to do an awful lot of the rush, haven't we? It's been a lot of ad hocery under extreme pressure, which is, you know, been very difficult for staff. And there's probably something there about planning for the future in a more measured way now that we're coming out of the pandemic, hopefully. So a lot in this, really. So I'm really grateful for you for joining us. You're probably a bit shell-shocked with the whole thing. Just leave you with, I think, Estelle's comment there in the chat. I'll just pick it up, which is, you know, if you do feel that you'd like to share your story more broadly and, you know, widen the discussion, we're happy on the comms front to provide any assistance that we can, and do give some thought to Kevin's earlier point about maybe doing a write-up. The human touch just adds so much to things, and you've been kind enough to share that with us today, so thank you.
Thank you.
I hope it's been enjoyable.
It has, yeah. Definitely one of those things that's out of my comfort zone. That's yeah, no, it has, and you know, I'm grateful that that you've all listened.
We're all great people. That's the key thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that gets lost in translation sometimes, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, we put our game face on, and you think there's not a person behind it, and I think I've learned as I've gone on that human element is so crucial. Now, being human, we're going to have to take a break. So I was going to say, Beth, you're very welcome to stay with us. This is an open meeting, so feel free to stay with us. But if you may have other things to get on with, so if you do, thank you again. Also say thank you to Sue as our interpreter. I think you've got to leave us also at this point. So much appreciated your short notice cover of the meeting. On my watch, it's 11:44. So could I trim the break slightly and suggest we come back at 11:55, which will give us time to get through the rest of the business. So if you wouldn't mind, if you're staying on, switch off to mute and video off, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, I'll make it 11:55. Just checking whether we got folks back. Yeah. Okay. Let's resume if you're happy to. I'm sorry we slightly curtailed the break. I'm looking to you, Rachel, actually at this point, because we move into the assurance section, an update on the IMTP and indeed then the monthly performance report. So you're on the stage 2 in a row here. So Rachel, I don't know whether you're yes, you've appeared. So we've juggled this. So you've got 2 papers in sequence.
Apologies for that. I couldn't hear you, but I realised I must have switched off my sound altogether on these systems. So apologies.
So you're on the feet for. We've got 20 minutes for the IMTP report as scheduled.
Yeah.
And then we go straight into the IPR at the originally planned time, where we've got 10 minutes. So the stage is yours for half an hour, basically, isn't it?
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much, Martin. So yes, if we, as you say, if we start with the paper, item 12 on the integrated medium-term plan, and this paper serves 2 purposes. One, to give the board a sense of where we've got to with this, the actions and the deliverables that we'd outlined in this year's IMTP, and then in brief, just to update the board on the development of this year's IMTP. So if I start with this year's IMTP, we've got a nice kind of graphic fairly early on in the paper, which just shows, the total number of deliverables due at the end of quarter 3, and those which are, completed, which are in blue, on track, which is green, paused, which is 12 white, sorry, and then a number which are amber, which mean progress being made but some delays, and then 3 red actions, which are fairly, way off, I suppose, the timescales that we'd originally put into the IMTP. So you can see there the 3 reds are outlined in particular. The reasons for some of that will be known, particularly around the delivery of the new SALAS system. The board has previously considered that. This paper was considered at the Finance and Performance Committee last week, and one of the questions that the committee asked was, what the assurance was around delivery of some of those amber deliverables. So you'll see later on in the report, after the kind of rundown in the tables of where we are against each of the specific deliverables, you'll see there's a little section there around the work that we're doing on assuring ourselves on the amber deliverables. So you can see there that there are 20 at the that have been reported amber at the end of quarter 3, and there are a number of factors which have played into that. Some of them are, genuinely complex risks that have perhaps been identified early on and which are coming into bear. There is certainly the impact of some of that reprioritization work that we've talked about before as we've gone through the Omicron wave in particular, and on top of the Omicron wave, we know we've had some new actions actually, and new priorities that have emerged during the year, particularly around performance improvement. So that has meant that some deliverables in the original IMTP have been slower to get going and to deliver as we would have hoped. You can see there that we've got some pulled out there in terms of the confidence of delivery. So we've got 4 that the teams who work on this and who've got responsibility for these deliverables are saying they're confident that by the end of quarter 4 we would deliver. And the remaining of those actions will not be completed in quite the way that we'd anticipated in the original IMTP. So I think almost all of them are work in progress, and it's actually more a case of timescales, and they will roll forward into next year's IMTP deliverables. So that's the kind of report on this year's IMTP, and I think we, in discussing this at F&P, that the general point of note, I think, was that given all that has been going on this year, the remaining work around the pandemic, and as I say, the additional actions that we've had to take on top of our plan at the beginning of the year, actually, I think we've done extremely well in continuing that programme of work, and in many cases, completing and being on track with key priorities there. So I think that's a good news story. The second and the last bit of the report then just details the next steps for how we're shaping up next year's IMTP. As the committee members will remember, the date for submission to Welsh Government has been pushed back a little bit, due in the main to the pandemic, so we are required to submit that by the 31st of March, but supplementary to that, we are required by the 28th of February to also submit to Welsh Government a statement, or I'm not quite sure what the format of that will be, but some assurance around whether or not we feel as an organisation that we will be able to deliver a balanced plan by the end of March. So they're looking for early indications across the board in terms of particularly that financial balance. And so we can we know as a board, and Martin, as you mentioned at the top of the meeting, that we had a development session on this last week. So the board members will be familiar with the way in which we're developing the plan and how it's shaping up. And the timetable at the bottom of this report just sets out the meetings that that plan will go to, and further development sessions now, in order to land us at a position where we can sign it off finally at board on the 24th of March. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
Very clear, Rachel. Actually, just on a factual point before we open it up, the timetable for the forward plan includes a February 25th board meeting as a further stage, doesn't it? Still, so I'm assuming we want to retain that opportunity, and it'll be a question of whether it's a public or a private session, depending on the sensitivity of the issues in terms of negotiation with commissioners, I guess. Would that be a fair assessment?
It is, yes.
Okay, just to be clear. Okay, let's throw things open. It's probably opportune, Rachel, I guess, to go to Emrys as chair of F&P, just to get his take from the committee about assurance on delivery to date, on the back of what Rachel has explained.
Yes, great. Thanks, Martin. Obviously, we had a bit more detail at F&P, and as Rachel has said, we were pleased with the progress to date, given the background to our operation. Rachel's mentioned the potential challenge in the finance side of next year's plan, and we at the moment are fairly comfortable that the team is working on resolving that. Obviously, we have a development session on the 18th of February, where we will be much nearer to understanding what the progress has been on that. But overall, the committee was, content to support the progress made to date, and look forward to the developments going up to approval.
Okay, so that really is an assurance message that there's nothing in this from the committee's viewpoint to signal any particular major concerns.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, that's what the committee is there for. So, I mean, that's important. Any other comments? I don't want to create a discussion that isn't, if people are comfortable with that position. The key thing is unprecedented circumstances and a very challenging plan. And the committee is in effect saying, very happy, Rachel, with the work you've done with the team to get us this far. Because it's been, at times against the odds, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the delivery of most of these are just, yes, my team collate a lot of the work around presenting it, but the delivery of it is the whole team, isn't it, in the organisation? Yes.
Yeah. I think that point's well made.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, if there's not a discussion to be had and people are comfortable, I'll take us to the recommendations. So I think this is applauded, Rachel, that we're not going through this, because I think people understand where we are. So we're asked to note progress made against the plan and the degree of confidence highlighted in delivering further progress in Q4. Are we happy to do that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, happy.
A lot of non-executive voices there, I hear. That's great. And progress with development of the 22 to 25 IMTP, which of course we've also considered in board development. Are we happy with the timetable update?
Yes.
Yes, happy.
Yes, happy.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. On your feet for item 2 in good order, Rachel.
Excellent. Good. Thank you very much.
On to the monthly performance report.
Thank you very much. Yes. So what I'm going to do is just, in terms of this report, just highlight some things from the S-bar, the covering S-bar, and obviously the detailed data pack is there at Annex 1, and you know, in F&P we certainly had, you know, members of the committee, you know, move into that pack and ask some detailed questions, which was really good. So just this report is based on December data. In the main, there are a couple of indicators that do arise quite late in the month. So there's a couple of indicators still which are relating to November. Broadly, it's the December pack. So the S-bar starts by looking at, you know, as you remember, we're looking at these measures in 4 quadrants in order that we're looking at the organisation from a balanced perspective. So first quadrant is around quality, safety and patient experience. And clearly for the December position, when we were looking at some of our call answering times, our callback times in the 111 service, our response times from an ambulance and 999 perspective, those times were not as good as we would have wanted. Definitely, we know that there are many challenges and reasons for that, and the paper outlines actions that we as a board and as an exec team we've taken and are taking to try and increase capacity in particular, but also other actions which will help us to respond to people more quickly. And I think, you know, so you can see there, for example, in the 999 space, we as a board agreed to recruit more staff to answer the 999 calls. Similarly, for 111, we've had funding from the programme board, the 111 programme board, to increase the number of call handlers. 111 in particular, we've also done quite a lot of work on, I suppose, the efficiency of that service, so which includes interactive voice response, which better manages people at the front end of that 111 call and gives people more information so they understand their options and helps them to understand how long they're going to have to wait. So all of that is improving the patient experience, but there's lots of action being taken in the 111 service in particular to, as I say, to really focus on how we use our call handlers and clinicians in the most effective way so that we can start to see improvements. And I think probably at the end of this report, Chair, if I can, I would just pass over to Lee just to reflect on a little bit of what the January position is starting to look like, because we are starting to see some improvements into January, which will come through in the next reports, obviously in due course. So we know that from a December perspective, we continue to see a challenge in terms of our call answering times and our response times. So from an ambulance perspective, an ambulance response perspective, we know that red and amber response times were not good. And in that regard, we know that we're on track to deliver the additional 127 staff that the Commission has funded us this year. So that's really positive. And obviously the board is very well aware that on top of that, we've also secured temporary capacity from a range of different sources, most significant of which obviously is the military capacity, which again helped in December certainly, and has ramped up in January and is making an even bigger impact in January. In terms of our own internal work to improve the efficiency of our own resources in ambulance response, we're continuing that work with trade union partners around workforce modernisation through the Leading Service Change Together programme. And we know we've restarted the roster review programme that was paused briefly as we considered the impact of new modelling, but that's commenced again and is on track in terms of starting to implement those new rosters in September next year. So I think that's really positive. And again, as I alluded to earlier, we've had that excellent funding from the Commissioner this year to start to recruit more clinicians into the clinical support desk, with the aim of, as well as making the service and that clinical service safer for patients, it's also going to be increasing our hear and treat rates, which means that we'll have to send, we won't need to send as many ambulances. So lots and lots of work being done there to manage and mitigate some of those risks. In terms of NEPTs, I think actually we've done pretty well in some of our performance indicators in NEPTs, and particularly again we've had some additional resource from commissioners to procure third-party providers, certainly for this year, and that is helping with the issues around social distancing, etc. Some of the other, if we move on to our people and the kind of issues and the things that are bringing out or being brought out rather in the measures here. So we've seen actually pretty good number of hours produced in December. That will, as I say, go up further in the last quarter of the year. But we do know, and I suppose this is this is where that military resource in particular has been so important, that our abstraction levels have remained high, and with COVID-19 having a significant impact on those abstractions, and so the military has offset and mitigated some of those ongoing difficulties and risks. So the sickness percentage there, you can see it at just over 11%. In November, and Claire may want to come in and just talk a bit about the kind of discussions we're having around that in a bit. Obviously, there's some measures around finance and value, particularly around post-production lost hours. So that links a bit to that modernisation agenda that I just talked about there, and the Leading Service Change Together workshops. That's really good progress being made there. On the partnership system contribution quadrant, we've done really well on our shift left, so we achieved 11% hear and treat rate in December. We've been aiming to do about 10.2% this year, and again, as I say, we'll be looking to really expand that into next year. Now we've got these additional clinicians. But obviously, the report does allude to, and this is something we've talked about a number of times before, and we mentioned earlier, the number of lost hours outside EDs was again extremely high in December. Again, it was the highest month we've seen, so that was over 18,000 hours lost. And as you heard earlier, the commissioners are extremely aware of that, have set some targets of health boards, and are expecting some delivery, some improvement trajectories there, and some action plans. So it's certainly December picture. I think the measures themselves are looking not great, but you can see, I hope and feel assured that some of those actions that we're taking are the right actions to move us in the right direction, where there are things that we can do ourselves. And as I say, it may be helpful to reflect, I think, on there are some kind of shoots there in January which are really showing that these actions are starting to have some really positive impact going into Q4. So I'll pause there, Martin, and
we go perhaps to the lead, do you think? But before we do, just one point of clarification for me around the action log from the beginning of the meeting, because you've actually mentioned post-production lost hours and the proportion attributable to return to base for meal breaks.
Yeah.
Which was the point in the action log.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that's been met.
Right.
what it's saying in effect is that about half of the reported post-production lost hours are attributable to the meal break issue, which doing the maths there means that they equate with about a third of the number of hours lost to handover delay. So proportionately, it started to put in perspective the relative impact of those abstractions. Is that a fair summary? So
yes, I mean, just one other point to note that I think is in the report, just to note that we are still doing some ongoing work to get that data a little bit more accurate. So there is still some slight concerns that that there are some data inaccuracies there, and the team are working really hard. So the numbers, are broadly right, I think, but there may be some changes once we get that reporting really crystal clear. And the other thing just to note is that in the data pack as well, Martin, the slide on page 22 breaks down all of the reasons for those post-production lost hours. So colleagues who want to look at that can see that as one reason, but all the other things that are brought into that equation. So I'm hoping that does really sign off that action as agreed. Yeah.
So we'll ask people at the end whether they're happy with that. Just wanted to be clear. No, that's very helpful. Should we go to Lee? But I'm conscious Emrys will want to come in after the executives have done their bit. But Lee, do you want to give a sort of perspective on green shoots?
Yeah, Chair. Yes, I think given how quickly we know the operational and dynamic picture has been changing, I've got some up-to-date position to share with the board. So if I start with 111, the back end of 2021 and the first week of this year were both very busy. What's been really good to see actually is over the last couple of weeks, we've been recording an abandonment rate in the region of 2%. And it's not actually been that low since we launched onto the new telephony platform back in September. So that's a really good sign and a culmination of some of the work that's been going on there. In terms of COVID-related abstractions, we're reaching a new plateau across the Operations Directorate of between 150 to 160 staff, which amounts to about 4 to 5% of the Directorate. That's down from a peak of 10 to 11% at the back end of December. And we're also seeing all service areas within the Directorate now coming in line to that sort of 5% level. Whereas at the back end of December, we saw some much higher, whilst we were at 10 to 11% for the Directorate, some service areas particularly high, like our clinical contact centres, edging towards 20%. Of course, those lower abstractions combined with the military support is absolutely aiding our resource production. And to give an example as to where we're at, conveying resources this week against our rosters is planning at 114%. So you get the indication there as to what capacity that's creating. From an activity perspective, demand through our 999 lines is beginning to settle. Over the last couple of weeks, we are now much more aligned to the demand patterns of the previous 3 years, which is well below our forecast. So that's a very positive signal. Last week, we responded to 70% of our verified incident demand. Now, compared to early 2021, we were responding to about 75 to 80%. So we do not have a full return yet to the amount that we were able to respond to before, but we have not seen 70% since May 2021. In terms of patient waiting times, last week our Red 8 performance hit 56%. And of course, I recognise that that is off our target. However, the last time that we were higher than that was a week in November 2021, and before that, August 2021. Our amber median last week also at 44 minutes. So again, not at the level that we would ideally like, but that is a level that we have not seen since May last year. I wouldn't yet quite describe our situation as stable because, of course, we know that we have military support with us through to the end of March, and that is certainly helping significantly. The COVID picture, COVID activity has been reducing for us as a proportion of our activity at call triage. We're down from a peak of 17% during this wave, currently at 11%. So that is a good sign and signal too. As Rachel mentioned, handover delays, of course, do remain very high. And actually, over the last 4 weeks, we've recorded some of the worst 4 weeks that we have known. And January is looking like the total numbers of hours lost will exceed December. So therefore, creating a new record for us. And so that undoubtedly continues to remain our greatest operational challenge at the moment, Chair.
It's really good to have that, Lee. And inevitably there is time lag in reporting, as we know, but it's great just to have a snapshot in, running up to the board. So that's brilliant. Thank you. Excellent stuff and encouraging, because Jason and I, meeting the minister a week or so back, were conveying the message that we expected the latter part of January to see some improvement. So that's being borne out by the evidence. Shall I go to Emrys, Rachel, just to get a take from F&P, which makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Martin. I don't want to prolong this because Rachel's done a really good presentation on the subject. We recognise that situation is quite challenging. At the time of the meeting, we'd had the highest 999 demand ever, as well as the highest number of calls to 111. So given the additional funding and the situation we've got with sickness, etc., I think the Trust has done about the best that it can under the circumstances, and has been quite dependent on the front line with the support from the armed services. So I guess the ongoing concern is the level of sickness that we've got at the moment. Hopefully that will improve as the year goes on, things get a bit warmer. And also the potential for the armed services to withdraw at the end of March. And at this stage, we don't know what impact that would have on us. Overall, I think the committee was content with the reporting and the actions that were being taken in considering the restrictions that we are under at the same time. So I think that's a summary of committee views.
That's really helpful, Emrys. So 2 areas, sickness still an issue for the committee, and also post-military, what the prognosis looks like. Yeah. Claire, perhaps you want to come in on the sickness issue.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just to reassure the board, obviously we maintain a close watch on this through the People and Culture Committee, also with regular sort of robust conversations there, and through the EMT as well. So I guess just building on what Lee had said there, the report today has November numbers in it. We expect December numbers to be much higher again, which reflects the rise and then the fall of Omicron through January. And so, you know, as we look at our numbers today, they're showing sort of those green shoots of recovery and coming back to a more realistic number where we usually are, as Rachel referred to. I mean, as an executive team, we've received and considered and have a good conversation about the sickness absence action plan that's now being developed. So Liz, as my new deputy director, has taken a grip on this one for us, and some fresh eyes, working collaboratively with Dr. Catherine, obviously, and then across some of the rest of the senior team in developing a set of actions. And I think our observations from yesterday, where we very much welcomed the granularity of the plan and the very structured approach, almost programme management approach that is being put forward now. And it will need to be a collaborative piece across all of our directorates, including sort of Rachel has offered some support from her team in terms of project management support for that. And clearly ops will play a significant role in that. And I'm grateful also, I should say, to Lee, because Lee has been taking a direct interest in some of the detail around the sickness. So it's not just me looking at long-term sickness cases, but I know that Lee has met with his senior team and accessed the support of Liz and Julie Stokes to really sit down and look at, starting with some of those longer term absences out of work because of shielding and on alternate duties, to see what we can do there and reassure ourselves that you know, we haven't lost people in the melee of everything that's been going on and taken our eye off the ball there. So I think it's a very detailed plan. We're just going to take a view as an executive team about where that is reported, progress is reported. It's important, I think, that we acknowledge EMT want a line of sight to this and the progress that's being made. We will have some more detail and action updates in the People and Culture Committee as it comes in February as well. So it will continue to be reported in there, and I'm sure we will have a link across into F&P just to provide the reassurance that the team are on it. I mean, these levels are not sustainable, and we recognise that, but we also recognise that it's a challenge, given the impact of the last 2 years on the workforce and basically across the whole of our organisation. So I think that I probably will stop there. I'm happy to take any questions on that, but that's where we are at the moment. So that plan is in place and in train.
That's really helpful, Claire, in a context where sickness absence figured in our discussions with the Minister. She obviously is looking at numbers across NHS Wales by organisation, also starting to look at comparators across UK. So helpful that we've got our foot on the pedal to try and bring sickness down as best we can. A couple of other comments you made in the margin there, Rachel, related to your discussion about life after March, which is that you're diving into the shift left activities. I think you said at next Finance and Performance Committee, those will serve to divert demand to other appropriate settings. And also you're doing some scenario planning, as I understand it, with ORH to look at demand and supply post 31st of March and test scenarios. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. So the same way that we've done, for winter, we're kind of moving to position, I think, where we're going to do this forecasting and modelling every quarter, so that enables us as an exec team to consider tweak plans, etc. That we might need to do to mitigate risks. And obviously the big one for us in April, as Lee has alluded to, is the removal of that military support in April.
Yeah, great, thank you. Paul, and then I think we'll try to draw this one to a conclusion.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on Claire's report, because at the last People and Culture Committee, we did a deep dive on sickness, and then we wanted an action plan, and we were waiting for the action plan to go to EMT, which it did this week. So we'll be picking up that action plan at the next PCC, which is on the 22nd of February, to go through that in much more detail again.
That's brilliant, thank you. Emrys comes in just as I move on, but go on.
Just by way of conclusion, Martin, at F&P, we recognise that, while it is a Finance Performance Committee and we do see these things, we recognise that the different committees take the lead on this. So happy to defer the detail of sickness, for example, to F&P, to the People and Culture Committee. And just to note that we actually referred PDARs from our committee to People and Culture, and then some of the detail around the quality and safety work to Quest from our meeting. So it's starting to get a structure that we recognise where things are reported in the Finance Performance Committee, but actually delegating it out to the appropriate area. So that's just a development.
Yeah, it sounds like the committee business is much smoother, and the understanding of committee boundaries is much clearer.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Claire, in the margin there has highlighted the fact that whilst sickness, underlying sickness, we are an outlier and that needs attention. Actually, during COVID, our most recent experience, we've seen less of an increase in absence than other organisations. So it's not an entirely bleak picture, so to speak. Claire, did you want to quickly come in on PADRs? I see you put your hand up on that, because that's highlighted in the report, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. So again, and we will again pick this up in more detail at the People and Culture Committee, but we had a good conversation about this at executive team yesterday, because we recognise, that our rates are not as high as they need to be, notwithstanding the challenges, the pressures, and we recognise just how difficult it has been for everybody across the organisation, particularly at REAP 3, and reap for sustained periods of time. So I think, as an exec team, we recognise some actions needed in the short term, and colleagues around the table took away the commitment to take an interest within their rates in their own teams to encourage sort of compliance, particularly the use of the PADR Lite process that we developed last year, which is really about a well-being check-in and a quick performance update and review of where we are. We think recording is still an issue of this, so we'll be promoting both the process and the help that is available to people to be able to report and record those PADR lights on the system. And so hopefully by the time we get to March, we should see some improvement in those rates. And then there is also a piece of work that we reported that we would take through the People and Culture Committee, which is a bit of another deep dive, for want of a better phrase, and a redesign of our PADR processes now to shift away from the very heavy reliance and focus on a single conversation during a year, and to recognise the benefit of real-time, high-quality feedback, and also some of the systems and ways of working that we already have in place across the organisation. So how do we recognise those and how do we value those? So that piece of work was due to take place back last year in about October time. It had to be put on hold because of everything that was going on, but it is due to be picked back up now in early February. So we should hopefully have some proposals come through in the next couple of weeks about what the future could look like in terms of a more agile and future fit sort of PADR process for our organisation.
That's helpful, thank you. I'm glad you're on the case, and I can vouch for the fact that the PADR recording issue is being chased down, because Trish only yesterday was talking to me about non-executive PADRs and whether they're being picked up. So the message has gone out. I think we should come to the recommendations on the report now. We had quite a discussion, Rachel, haven't we? But if you're comfortable, should we go to the sort of end point, which is we're asked to consider the report. Well, clearly we've done that, and the actions being taken. Are we happy with the assurance provided, whether further information, scrutiny or assurance is needed, or further remedial actions? Have we considered those things? Are we happy to say that we walk through that?
Yes.
Yes, happy.
Right. Yep.
We've picked up some of the deep dive activities in committees, which has been useful. I think formally also we ought to add, are we, just to check that people are happy to close off the outstanding action in the action log relating to the recording of post-production lost hours, because Rachel has provided assurance that the detailed breakdown is provided in the appendix to the report, and that further work is being done to refine the figure for return to base for meal breaks. So are we happy on that basis to close that particular action?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yes,
thank you.
Well done. Good news all round. Rachel, thank you for both of those reports. Great stuff. And also to you, Lee, for providing the update on performance in the last week or so. Let's move on then to finances month 9. And over to you, Chris, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a quick update on what's already provided to board members by way of the paper, if I can, please. So the month 9 financial position and performance, revenue and capital, and the year-end forecast was considered by Finance Performance Committee last week, but by way of a sort of presentation rather than a detailed paper this time, mainly due to the timing of the month end coming into the new year. But pleased to sort of continue to report through to board that we are on track to balance. We're year to date, month on month, continued our run rate of balancing the revenue financial position of the organisation with a very small underspend year to date, now cumulatively in the position, and continue to forecast on track to balance by the end of this financial year. As you would hope, hopefully by this time of the financial year now, in terms of residual risks, there's very few remaining risks, and minimal risks, and any that are in the system are more technical in nature and a very low risk in terms of the ability for us to deliver that balanced position. And there's actually a bit of an update on one of them that is described in the paper, in that the only kind of, if you like, non-technical risk that's still outstanding at the month 9 reporting, which is finalising the very final values of income flows into us for the current financial year. It has now been closed off in the last few days with colleagues in my team and the commissioning team and government colleagues. So that's all been finalised. And as you saw in this paper, the other sort of significant element, obviously, of spend that we've incurred this year directly as a result of the pandemic, the final element of funding to close that cost off that we're getting directly from government was also confirmed as part of the closing of the month 9 position, and has been invoiced now to government. So that's all resolved as well. A couple of other quick updates on the position going forward in terms of capital. There's a continuing move towards the delivery of the full capital allocation for this year. Some good progress early in the year in terms of that cash flow profile and accelerating some capital spend. Some of that's been sort of negated a little bit over the last month or two with a few delays that have kicked in as a result of the spike again in the pandemic, but we still remain on track to deliver the current level of capital funding that's detailed within the paper. And of course, there is, as referenced earlier, still probably an item or two that hadn't been formally confirmed to us at the end of this reporting period that will be added into that. The most significant one is the government funding for the purchase in this financial year now of the site for the South East Wales Fleet Workshop, which was confirmed after this closing period, but will be in the books now for the month 10 position and will need to be completed in terms of a purchase by the end of March. There's still the possibility of some other year-end items from a national and government perspective that we wouldn't want to not lose the opportunity to seek to capitalise on if they become available. So we'll keep board close to that should they materialise. None of them, I think, could be at a value that we would necessarily need board approval in terms of expenditure levels, but we'll sort of, I say, make sure board are cited on anything that comes in over the last quarter's reporting in terms of that as well. So now the focus, clearly what this has allowed us to do in terms of both the revenue, capital, and the other statutory financial duties that we have around public sector payment policy and external financing limit, does allow us now to sort of start focusing on that year-end period, the accounts period, planning for the audit of those accounts, and any other outstanding items that might be emerging, some of which are nationally in terms of managing that audit process going into the year-end, and some of the, perhaps again, slightly more technical items that some of the changes in the way in which we're managing some things that were previously on the balance sheet might need to be impacted. But again, any updates on that in particular that need to be cited through the committee will go to audit committee in March in the first instance. So I guess that what that also then does is allow us to, as an organisation, as a team, start more focusing on or continuing our continued focus on the financial planning for next year. But more on that to board later. So the papers brought today, as I say, the Finance Performance Committee had a version of this via a presentation last week, but the formal papers brought through today for hopefully gaining assurance of our year-to-date and forecast position, both capital and revenue, asking the board to note that, and as is required by Welsh Government, it formally includes now the monitoring returns that we submitted to Government the last 2 months as a catch-up, as we haven't had a board or committee that's allowed us to bring them through in the meantime. But again, that's brought here just for noting, Chair, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Brilliant, Chris. Good job. Very thorough report and further update. Thank you. Emrys, anything you want to add to what Chris has said from an F&P viewpoint?
No, that's fine. I think the committee was happy with the progress at the time with the presentation. This paper now brings it some more detail into that, so that's appreciated, and it's in line with our expectations. I guess the only point to note is that we identified a new risk, which was 458, and that's the ongoing commitment from East and Welsh Government for one-off payments we have this year and where there are recurrent funds required. So I I don't know if some of this has been mitigated by our current position. Perhaps Chris can clarify that, or whether it's an ongoing risk that we need to cover.
No,
but other than that, that's fine.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. No, that is the ongoing position. That's more the recurrent and full year costs going into next year for items that have been funded and confirmed more non-recurrently from a funding perspective in this year. So we'll have a bit more of that later. So that risk will need to be continued through the process in the way that it is. Hopefully, as we touched on briefly when the commissioners were with us earlier, we got a mechanism in place to allow us to mitigate that and to close any resulting financial gap. But at the minute, we do need to still probably maintain that risk as a means of keeping an oversight on the need to do that.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, obviously the discussion in closed board, which we'll come on to resolve, will pick up on next year's finances, which are subject to negotiation, aren't they, with our commissioner, which is why we need to have the discussion outside the public arena, as these are ongoing discussions. Okay. There are no other comments. I think, Chris, if you're happy, we could go to the recommendation. So we're asked to scrutinise, comment and receive assurance on financial position and the year-end forecast, noting, of course, that this was discussed at F&P. So are we happy to do so?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, happy with it. Yep.
Yeah, good. The lack of discussion, Chris, I think is more evidence of assurance, not anything to the contrary. So well done, thank you. So on that note, we move on to the board committee reports, which are, there's quite a few of these, but probably fair is just to take them in order. These are by way of assurance. Could I ask chairs in presenting the reports, well, firstly take them as read, but secondly, if you feel we've already covered aspects of the report in the earlier discussions, perhaps then just draw out those things that are above and beyond those things we've already discussed. So first up, Paul, I think it's yourself, isn't it, for People and Culture Committee?
Yes, thanks, Chair. On the alert actions for the board, we've already discussed it in some respects with the sickness absence update that Claire just gave. In terms of vaccinations, we did recognise that at the time of the meeting it was quite low, so we were looking to the Director of Paramedicine to look at other methods of improving and increasing the uptake, and we'll have a further meeting to discuss that on the 22nd of February. But we've already discussed that in the board meeting today. Just a couple of areas to advise the board. You'll be aware that our people strategy was due for refresh this year, but in view of all the demands that have been made on the organisation, we agreed as a committee that we would roll forward the current people strategy into the next year, and we would look at how we develop the ongoing strategy from there on. And at our next meeting, we'll be looking at how our engagement plan to develop that, recognising it's been unprecedented the last couple of years for all of us. You'll recall, and it comes back to the discussion you had with Emrys around the smoothing of business between committees. You'll recall that there was an internal audit around the trade union facilities agreement. Just to update board that we have now agreed a new facilities agreement with our trade union colleagues. And that has changed some of the recommendations that came from internal audit. So we took that back to audit committee on the 2nd of December, and audit committee and our internal auditors accepted our change in practice in terms of some of those recommendations. Obviously, there are ongoing discussions with our trade union colleagues going forward in terms of our partnership working, and again, that will be reported back through People and Culture Committee. We had a very good staff story at the committee. NEP's colleague who contracted COVID, and what was really reassuring is the organisation's support to her whilst she was going through that experience. So it was really good to hear firsthand, as we've heard today, from colleagues who have experienced their own challenges this year. There were a number of procedures we agreed, and we also took into account the work that's been done on the behaviours refresh, which we've discussed at board development sessions, and we'll continue to discuss going forward, prior to its launch later this year. And then on the areas of assurance, just noted the strong partnership working, which was reflected in a lot of the papers that we had at the PCC. The Welsh language standards, again, the Welsh Language Advisory Board are working really hard on areas where we need to improve our ability to meet the standards. And again, we'll be bringing that back through PCC. And as part of the committee subcommittee structure, we're looking at the Welsh Language Standards Group as a primary source of that. And then we had the first integrated quality and performance report for October at the meeting, which brought together the issues around quality and performance. And we agreed that we need to then look at how that is reflected in the committee assurance framework that we receive as a committee, to ensure that we are not, that we're not duplicating that work. So I hope that helps. Happy to take questions, myself and Claire.
Great report, Paul, got to say. It's very clear, well written, does give us a nice flow of business, doesn't it? Just to say, incidentally, before we take any questions, that Jason now, as I said at the beginning, has had to leave us to join the Health and Social Care Committee of the Senedd for a scrutiny session. So I've just wished him luck. He's now left us. Any questions on that report from colleagues? I think that silence says people are very happy with the work. You must have been very busy. Comprehensive plan of activity there.
And just to give our thanks to Trish and the team for bringing that that together from the committee meeting. It's quite a long committee, a long agenda, but the concise nature of that report is really good. Excellent. So I think we're just asked to note that report then, aren't we, if you're happy? Yes. Thanks, Chair. And Paul, thanks to you personally for the work you're doing in leading that committee. It really is very heartening. Good, thanks. Thank you. Well, we'll move on then to, referring back to my notes, the report from the Audit Committee, which is over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. I can be brief. I think a number of the items discussed at the December meeting have been covered. I think the other thing just to note, and I think I've said this before, the meeting is well supported by Wales Audit and our internal auditors. They've always attended, as you can see from the bottom, they've attended all our meetings and have provided quite a lot of input actually to the discussion and debate at the meetings. The only thing I'll draw to your attention is at the top of the report, which is under the alert, which was about a non-compliance issue, which we discussed, and we're going to agree, I think, at our next meeting, the way forward to make sure that what happened on that occasion doesn't happen again. Everything else, though, Chairman, has been covered either in discussion in this meeting, or I'll assume that it's been read by members of the committee today. So that's all I'm going to say.
Nothing to, just a question from me then, Martin, on the structured assessment. That, I guess, just to highlight it, it's an important document. It's attached as a consent item to today's papers. My reading of your perspective on it is that there's nothing major emerged from it, though we got
no, there's nothing major emerging. In fact, I mean, the one thing we do and we're seen to do is to regularly review the way we work as an organisation, and the assessment process is giving reassurance about not just the way we do things, but the fact that we look at the way we do things regularly. And I think that's an important point to make. But no, there's nothing of concern there. And we have reviewed, I mean, it's interesting, Emma's made the point earlier about moving responsibilities for sickness, for example, over to the people in culture. If you remember, we did have a debate about potential gaps that might, where things fall between the committee structure, or indeed are dealt with twice, if you like, by different committees. So I think over the last year or so, we've tried our best to iron those areas out, and I'm sure there'll always be areas that we can be better at in terms of that. Well, we had a discussion earlier, didn't we, about risk management and what should come to the board and what should be left to the committee structure. So I think we'll continue to look at those things and make sure they're dealt with in the right place.
yeah, there's an important role there for audit committee, isn't there, in taking that overarching view of all these activities and feeling that it's got the freedom to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm very happy with that report, but colleagues, are there any questions or comments?
No.
Okay, that's very encouraging. I mean, the structured assessment did make reference to our informal board strategy group. They picked up on the fact that's not a formal committee, and that for the auditors, I wouldn't say it was a concern, but they just drew that out. But I think we've looked at that and said to ourselves, well, as long as the board is in the loop with the...
Well, I think actually at the moment we haven't got a committee other than the board itself that considers strategy, and maybe that's the right place for it. It's about how we dovetail the discussion on strategy and planning into the work that we do using these existing structures. So we haven't, they're right to pull that out, but we did make the point that it was not a statutory committee of the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust. It was more about looking at the way we did things. We may need to consider it actually at a future meeting, Martin, about where does it sit? Should it be done by the full board? I mean, my view is yes, it should. It is a full board issue, but we probably need to find space in the schedule of meetings to devote to this, so that it's not added on as an agenda item number 24, if you like. It's it's probably almost a full day for the board once a year.
Yeah,
but anyway, we can talk the detail. Sorry, Martin.
No, it's a very good point. Let's clock that as something for further discussion. The notion of if the board is to undertake this task, then formally, then build time into the calendar for that. I think that's worthy of follow up, because I support your view that the whole board should be engaged in this, and therefore we need to afford the time.
Yep.
So thank you. And if there are no other comments, we're happy to note the report and the update from Martin.
Yes.
Thank you, folks. So moving on, Kevin, I think you're on your feet now with Academic Partnership Committee and then Charitable Funds.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Not a lot to add to either of those areas of activity. We're still waiting for some white smoke on confirmation of university status. There's a couple of anomalies that Trish and Estelle are working through behind the scenes, and Estelle in particular has been engaged with Universities Wales in order to look at how the partnership agreement would work, given that we're an all Wales organisation and not regionally based. And then, so that's all to say really on that. We're just sort of beavering away behind the scenes in terms of structure and partners, and waiting for some communication from the Welsh Government. But on the charitable funds front, nothing more to add that we didn't discuss earlier with regard to the audit. The only thing really to say is we did have a conversation at the last meeting around the recruitment of the consultancy post, which was a bit more complex than we had originally thought, due to procedure more than anything. So we agreed to extend the recruitment date, and Estelle is on that as we speak. That's it.
Okay. Craig, do come in.
Chair. Just a quick on there is that we don't have any TU partners on the academic partnership working group.
I know that, and we're on it. We're just trying to set up processes, and it is that was part of the conversation around in the last meeting, Craig. So thanks for bringing it up. But we are. I can assure you, we're on it.
Thank you.
Is that
I'll be in touch, Craig.
That's a positive on it then, Kevin?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely.
That's yeah, we should correct that, shouldn't we? And it's an important agenda for TU partners to be engaged with.
Yep, absolutely.
So an open door there, Craig, and we'll capture that in the minutes. Okay, and in which case I'll be happy to receive the two reports there from Academic Partnership and Charitable Funds.
Yes.
Yes,
okay. Thank you, folks. And lastly, no means least, of course, finance and performance, some of which we've heard about already. So over to you, Emrys.
Yes, thanks, Martin, and thanks to Trish for the paperwork. It's much appreciated. As you say, most of this has been covered in one way or another. The key point, I think, under the alerts section is the delay to SALIS, which is our sort of catch-all new development in terms of using our resources to better effect. That is going back what looks like to be a couple of weeks from the first delay. I think it's still a risk, even though the supplier capita has put a better or different resource into the subject, and they appear to be sort of picking up the pace in delivering what's required. And I think it's also helpful that Andy Haywood has come into the frame more effectively, helping to drive it forward. Something to note.
Okay, and that's on the agenda for this afternoon, assuming that we agree to meet in closed session, the SALIS thing I'm referring to.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and so you're happy the rest of that report we either take as read or we covered in the updates you provided through the meeting?
Yes, we are. We've covered the risks, the changes that are planned there, and the new risk identified. Finance position as well covered, IMTP update and performance.
Another excellent report, I think. It seems to have been a very, very busy meeting and well captured in that document. Any comments from colleagues? I think that's success, actually. So we're happy to receive that report.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, happy.
Yes.
Yes. Just a quick pause there. I feel that reporting mechanism, a lot of work for Trish and her team to push that through, but it does seem to make an awful difference to our business, an awfully good difference to our business, I should add. Is that the mood of colleagues? It's a welcome addition to process, I think.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Just testing. Okay. Well, I won't hold back. Let's move on to the next item, which is our board and committee calendar. We're looking ahead. I think this one's yours, Trish, is it not?
It is. Thank you, Chair.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. So the schedule of dates that you've got in front of you includes 6 scheduled board meetings for 22-23 and 2 additional meetings to approve the annual report and the accounts and the IMTP, as well as the AGM. So board meetings will be scheduled to alternate between Cardiff and St Asaph, and will be complemented with a board development day the day prior, with a total of 10 development days scheduled into this calendar. You'll also see that the committees and the Chair's working groups are also scheduled in, all of these currently due to start at 9:30 in the morning. So we will be making an assessment this year of the benefits and the practicalities of particularly People and Culture and the Equality Committee meeting bi-monthly in 23-24, so that they align more closely to the board cycle as Finance and Performance does. And as we go through these effectiveness reviews and build a clear cycle of business, which we're developing as part of that process, the line of sight for that will be much clearer as well. So we will continue to update the board on progress with that. This schedule's been reviewed by Executive Management Team, Chair's Working Group as well, and is before the board for approval and for noting the long-term ambition to align those key committees to the board.
So in essence, Trish, you've clocked the agenda around committee alignment, but wisely decided to adopt a pragmatic approach for the year ahead, recognising that we could there could be too much disruption trying to go flat out at this stage. So that's the spirit of this, isn't it? So colleagues, are you any comments on that? Are we comfortable with that proposition? Bethan?
Yeah, fine.
Bethan's got a comment though.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I couldn't unmute myself quickly enough then. Just a point of accuracy, really. I know Trish has just mentioned all meetings that are soon to commence at 9:30 in the morning. Quest is the one outlier with this, because historically we've always met in the afternoon. So I just wanted to mention that as a point of accuracy. I don't know whether we're changing it, Trish, moving forward, or have I missed something there?
They're not in the diary yet, Beth Ann, so we can take that conversation separately and work out the timing of that, and likewise for any of the chairs of the other committees as well, because as soon as we've approved them, we'll start getting those meetings in the diary.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So, Beth Ann, if you feel cheerful enough in the morning to meet, then I'm sure that's possible. So we'll leave that with you to resolve with Trish. Okay, thanks for the point of detail. Are we happy then to approve that schedule of dates and meetings, and note the ambition to align dates for key committees to board?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Carte blanche there, Trish, to go away and bombard diaries quite soon. I'm sure Caroline will be onto that very quickly.
Thanks very much.
Okay, now we go into just flashing down the agenda here. We go into consent items where we don't formally go through things, but unless people wish to. So we're firstly asked to note the use of the trust seal on 3 occasions. We have to report that to board. We're asked to adopt the minutes of committees which have been approved, and also to receive the minutes of ESC, NWSSP and WHSSC. So those are all consent items. Are we happy to take those on block unless there are any points people want to raise?
Yes.
Happy, yes.
Okay,
Yep,
good. Thank you. We're down to any other business. I'll pause there. My notes say there is nothing that's been logged with me in advance, so, but if there is anything, feel free to speak. Okay, no items of AOB. Moving on then, next meeting, open meeting, public board, to note that it's 9:30 on the 24th of March. As I signalled at the beginning, we're anticipating, with hopefully restrictions lifted and remaining lifted at that point, that we can resume face-to-face socially distanced meetings with access by link in for those who can't attend face-to-face. So that's the ambition, to go back to the model that we had in November. So that's just to note. Then finally, we need to resolve to go into private session this afternoon for business that we are unable to take in public because of reasons of confidentiality, commercial sensitivity. So you happy to do that? I hope you are. We have an agenda. Okay.
Yes.
And secondly, you recall during the discussion about IMTP development, we picked up on the fact that we have an IMTP date, an extra board date on the 25th of February, still in the calendar, which we may well want to avail ourselves of to work through the IMTP before it's ultimately finalised. That may need to be a private session because it's that discussive type of meeting. So could we also resolve to keep the option open of a private meeting on the 25th? Are you happy to do that? It may be possible to hold it in public, but there is a distinct possibility of it needing to be in private.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Phew. Right. 1:05. That brings us to the conclusion of the public meeting. So I just wanted to thank you all for your contributions and patience. Thank Beth Ann and also our commissioners for their contributions to the meeting, all very productive. And I look forward to seeing you we actually get a long lunch hour, as they say, 2:30 for the private session, which we resolved to hold today. So see you a bit later on. I think that will be on a different link.
Yeah.
Okay. And wish you all well, and look forward to seeing you at the next public meeting in March. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.